Chapter 998. Your Excellency, are you talking about the Misty Hall? This subordinate has already passed down Sect Master's decree a few days ago. Misty Hall's Yang Rupiying, Vice Hall Master Gao Kunhing, and the girl called O Yin have all been sent to Emotian Palace. What about Ming Qing? Are they ready? Well, I don't know. I've already informed Ming Qing. He should be here by now. Well, let's go. Junior Sister Xuezhen, let's go to Emotian Palace together. Ask Elder Jingfan, several masters, Peacock, Chen Shun, and the others to come here. I'm here to announce a happy event. Happy event? Master Xuezhen was obviously stunned, then nodded and went out. Yes, it's a happy event that our sect has been preparing for a long time. Master Jingyi seemed to be answering Master Xuezhen, but Master Xuezhen had already gone far away. In Emotian Palace, it was the usual meeting. Everyone was sitting with their heads down, waiting for Master Jingyi's arrival. Only Chen Shan tilted his head and looked at the old masters who usually didn't come out, and Yang Rupiying, Gao Kunheng, and the others who were sitting far away from them. He opened his mouth several times but hesitated. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, then, "Are you Zhang Xiaohu?" Wasn't the one sitting behind Gao Kunheng Zhang Xiaohu? At this time, hearing a female disciple call his name, Zhang Xiaohu looked up. It was a female disciple wearing a mask and a palace dress. How could he tell who she was? She didn't dare to answer casually and turned to look at the Misty Hall's hall master with a puzzled expression. Yang Rupiying heard it too. She glanced at Chen Shun and said with a smile, "This? Junior sister, are you familiar with the disciples of the Misty Hall?" Chen Shun smiled and said, "Haha, I'm not familiar with them. I just want to ask, is that Chen Shun of your Misty Hall doing well?" Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu immediately understood. This female disciple must be the Chen Shun mentioned by Xiaohua. She has the same name as Chen Shun, but she wore different clothes when she went to the Misty Hall last time, so they can't recognize each other. Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohu to speak, Yang Rupiying smiled and said, "So it's Junior Sister Chun. I was wondering who was familiar with our ethereal hall's disciples." Then, he hesitated and asked, "I wonder, why is Junior Sister Chun here?" Of course, Yang Rupiying was definitely suspicious. She knew the rules of Emotian Palace. When she was under Nun Jingyi's tutelage, even though she was very favored, she didn't have the right to sit there. He, Senior Sister Yang, I, Senior Sister Peacock, and Junior Sister Yin have all received the inheritance of our fragrant sect. Only those who have been classified as legacy disciples are qualified to sit here. Hearing this, Yang Rupiying was surprised. But more than that, she felt bitter. She had also gone through the test of the refining heart cave. Unfortunately, the test happened after she went to Emocho City. At that time, she was deeply in love and couldn't extricate herself. How could she escape from the inner demons of the refining heart cave? The situation in the dreamland was absurd and abnormal. She did not even tell Openg about it and buried it deep in her heart. When she heard that he was the successor, her heart was filled with mixed feelings. There was some bitterness and some jealousy. When she thought of her dead husband, she felt even more grief. Yang Rupiying was only slightly distracted. She immediately stood up and saluted. "Congratulations to the 3 junior sisters. These 3 would be the highest level of the fragrant sect in the future. If the Misty Hall wanted to be safe in the fragrant sect, of course, they would have to rely on them. How could Yang Rupiying not be respectful?" "We don't dare." Peacock stood up and returned the salute. "We were just lucky. We don't dare to show off. Senior Sister Yang is the head of the hall. We will have to rely on you in the future. The Misty Hall is newly established by the fragrant sect. We will have to rely on you in the future," Yang Rupiying said with a smile. "Haha, we are all sisters of the same sect. We should do so." Chen looked at Zhang Xiaohu and asked, "Zhang Xiaohu, how is Chen?" Zhang Xiaohu smiled and said, "Junior Sister Chan is doing very well. Her skills have improved greatly, and she is in seclusion on Shirxin Peak." "Ha ha ha," Chen clapped and said, "Now that's interesting. If her martial arts were too weak, she would not be worthy of the name Chen." Zhang Xiaohu was sweating. He unconsciously thought of what Zhang Xiaohua had said and looked at Chen. "You're all here?" A voice sounded from Imo Palace. Everyone was surprised and looked up. They didn't know when Nanjingyi had quietly sat there. Greetings to the hierarch. Everyone went forward and saluted. Well, sit down, Nanjingyi said with a smile. After everyone sat down, Nanjingyi looked at the haggard young Rupiying and said with concern, Rupiying, how are you? On Shershin Peak. Hearing her master's tone, which was the same as when she taught her martial arts, young Rupiying's heart ached and she almost cried. She didn't answer immediately and lowered her head to hold back her tears for a while. Then she looked up and said with a forced smile, Thank you, Master, for your concern. I am fine. Alas, Rupiying, it's not that I want to scold you. You are not suitable to be a hall leader. It's better to concentrate on your martial arts. Look, several junior sisters have received the inheritance. You, even if you failed in the refining heart cave, you still have a chance to enter the way of immortality. Master, thank you for your concern. I will remember my late husband's last words. I can't let him down. I still hope that I can take good care of his disciple. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. The Misty School has to walk on its own. How can it be sheltered under the wings of a little girl like you? The Misty School? Young Rupiying was stunned. Obviously, she knew that Nanjingyi had made a mistake. She smiled bitterly and said, The Misty Hall is doing well now. I will hold on for a few more years. It won't be too late to consider it after the younger disciples have matured. Then, have you not considered letting go now? Nanjingyi seemed to ask casually. Now? Young Rupiying was even more stunned. She didn't know what Nanjingyi meant. She thought for a while and said, As Master said, I really don't want to be the hall leader of the Misty Hall. But without me, I'm afraid the entire Misty Hall will be bullied by others. Of course, if Master has any arrangements or a suitable candidate to be the hall leader of the Misty Hall, as long as the disciples of the Misty Hall are not treated unfairly, I will definitely agree. Seeing that young Rupiying was so resolute, Nanjingyi asked again, Then, are you going to be the hall leader of the Misty School? Then I'm even less interested. Young Rupiying heard it and said casually. But then she came to a realization. It was as if she was struck by lightning. Nanjingyi had already mentioned the Misty School and not the Misty Hall twice. How was that a slip of the tongue? Obviously, there was another meaning behind it. At this moment, not to mention young Rupiying, everyone understood the meaning behind his words. Their faces were all filled with shock. Zhang Xiaohu was even more so. His eyes were wide open as he looked at this conversation that had nothing to do with him. Master, what do you mean? Young Rupiying's voice was trembling. It's very simple. There's no meaning. Nanjingyi's tone was very indifferent. I'm just asking if you are willing to be the hall leader of the Misty School? Nanjingyi's voice was very soft. But in everyone's eyes, it was as if a hammer was hammering on their hearts. No one expected her to ask such a question. Master, you mean to let the Misty Hall split the incense cult and set up another Misty School? Master, I didn't mishear you, did I? Young Rupiying still didn't dare to confirm it. Why not? Nanjingyi waved her hand casually. I never intended to keep the Misty Hall in the Shershin Peak. Ever since the Misty Peak, I never intended to. Everyone in Imo Palace was shocked again. For a moment, young Rupiying didn't know what to feel. At the same time, all the puzzling things that happened in the Misty Hall and the Shershin Peak in the past 5 years were explained. Nanjingyi didn't let other outer disciples into the Misty Hall and didn't split the Misty Hall into other outer sects because of young Rupiying. More importantly, she didn't intend to keep the Misty School in the incense cult. As for the so-called Misty Heights, Nanjingyi didn't care at all. She only wanted to be gentle and didn't want to be forceful. Knowing this, Rupiying, do you still not want to be the hall leader? Nanjingyi asked with a smile. I still have the same words. I really don't have the ability to manage people. Young Rupiying still said, I'm already struggling to manage the Misty Hall under your wings. How can I manage the Misty School? If you have a more suitable candidate, I'm willing to stay in the Shershin Peak. Well, good. Nanjingyi nodded slightly and seemed to be quite satisfied. As soon as he said that, a certain someone in the hall became extremely excited. His palms were almost sweating. This person was Gao Kunheng. Was there a need to explain? The Misty Hall had a hall leader and 2 vice hall leaders. Yang Ruping didn't want to be the hall leader, let alone the hall leader. Among the 2 vice hall leaders, the other vice hall leader, Aunt Chin, wasn't called by the hierarch at all. Did he need to be told? The new hall leader of the Misty School must be him. Sure enough, Yang Ruping turned her head slightly to look at Gao Kunheng. Gao Kunheng also felt the cult leader's gaze at the same time. He immediately raised his head and puffed out his chest, acting like a loyal subordinate who was unafraid of death, willing to sacrifice his life, and willing to work hard. Unfortunately, Nun Jingyi was wearing a veil, so he couldn't see whether she was satisfied or not. However, just as Gao Kunheng was waiting for Nun Jingyi to clarify her words, Nun Jingfan interjected. Gao Kunheng almost wanted to kneel in front of Nun Jingfan and beg her to be more polite and not interrupt. He heard Nun Jingfan clap her hands and say, "Honorable cult leader, I really don't know what to say. To tell you the truth, I really didn't expect honorable cult leader to let go. It's much more brilliant than holding it in your hands." -4. Chapter 999. After the shopkeeper left, Ming asked, "Xiaohua, when did you come to this restaurant?" 5 years ago? Zhang Xiaohua said meaningfully. "Back then, I spent 50 copper coins to have a meal here." Ha ha ha, 50 copper coins? Meng gradually understood the meaning of 50 copper coins after leaving the chanting incense cult. She couldn't help but chuckle. But before she could finish laughing, she suddenly woke up and grabbed Zhang Xiaohua's arm. "Xiaohua, you said 5 years ago? Wasn't that when I met you?" "Yes, that's right." Zhang Xiaohua nodded solemnly. "It was 5 years ago when I met you and Shirtai outside Poyang Town. God bless me, God bless me." Meng's eyes were almost filled with tears when she heard that. She clasped her hands together and thanked God sincerely. Meng's memories started when she met Shirtai. If they could find the place where she met Shirtai, they would most likely be able to find her origins. However, Meng followed Shirtai back to the chanting incense cult and never came out again. Shirtai also didn't tell her where she met Meng. Later, Shirtai was killed and Meng didn't know where she met Meng. The great master Changgung of the Dalan Temple wrote Poyang Town's name on the list. But before they could find Poyang Town, they gave up. If they didn't meet Chu Zhigao at Dragon Mountain and talk about Poyang Town, they probably wouldn't have come here to take a look. Then, why don't we hurry over and find that fairy and thatched cottage? Meng was a little anxious. Zhang Xiaohua smiled. Since we're already here and Chu Sanfeng isn't here, the mysterious person behind us probably doesn't know where to start. Moreover, the most important thing is that when you left with Nun Jingxian that day, I came out from there alone. I have long forgotten the path I took. If I don't investigate clearly, where do you want me to find it? Yes, I understand. Meng nodded. As he spoke, the shopkeeper walked over with a jug of wine in his hand. He sat down beside Zhang Xiaohua and smiled. "Have you been here before, dear guest? Forgive my poor eyesight, but I did not think of it. Haha, there are so many people coming in and out of the restaurant every day. If you remember, you would have already. You have a point." Sigh. Back then, when the shopkeeper saw that an outsider from Jianghu actually remembered him from his early years, he felt rather emotional. While drinking, he bragged about his story. In fact, it was very simple. It was just that the shopkeeper was nimble and quick-witted. Thus, he won the appreciation of the old shopkeeper and betrothed his only daughter to him. While the shopkeeper was showing off, the waiter served a few secret dishes and the spicy chicken offal. Looking at the spicy chicken offal that was already in her memory, Zhang Xiaohua was very emotional even before she ate it. That was then and this was now. In just 5 years, the vicissitudes of life had changed so much. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly asked curiously, "Shopkeeper, your chicken offal is obviously much lesser than before. Why is it more expensive? As a person, it's better to be more honest." Who knew that the shopkeeper didn't blush at all? He shook his head and said, "You don't know. This dish was left behind by the old shopkeeper. How would I dare to smash the signboard? It's just that in these few years, the price of pork has skyrocketed. Not to mention other things. The amount of pork that ordinary people eat has increased exponentially. The price of pork has increased? What does it have to do with chicken offal? Dear customer, if the price of pork has increased, won't the people who eat meat have to spend more money? Where will the money come from? It's nothing more than the price of rice and the price of things to buy. If these things increase, won't the price of the people who buy these things increase as well? Then, not to mention other things, won't the price of the ingredients, feed, and waiter in the other shop increase as well? Since the price of feed will increase, won't the price of the chicken offal in the other shop increase as well? If that's the case, won't the spicy chicken offal in front of you also increase in price? Zhang Xiaohua was flabbergasted and speechless. He'd been wholeheartedly focused on cultivating the immortal Tao and had never imagined that the affairs of the world would be so complicated. How could a small restaurant like this contain so much knowledge? How could it reveal so many things in the world? Karma and reason. Unknowingly, the hand of karma in the heavenly Tao galaxy became a little clearer. Dear customer, dear customer? When he heard the manager's call, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have awakened from a dream. He was jolted awake from his immersion in the comprehension of karma. Come, guest. Try my spicy chicken giblets. Does it still taste the same? Although the chef has changed, the taste should still be the same. Under the shopkeeper's hospitality, Zhang Xiaohua, who hadn't eaten meat for a long time, also ate 2 mouthfuls. As for the taste, please, it was all spicy. Back then, Zhang Xiaohua had drunk a few pots of tea. How could she taste it now? As for the other secret dishes, she only tasted them briefly. It was the same for Ming. After eating a little, she put down her chopsticks. She still wanted to hurry and find out about her origins. Dear customer, is it not delicious? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua and Ming put down their food after a few mouthfuls, the shopkeeper was very surprised. Haha, it's nothing. It tastes the same as before. It's just that I'm not hungry or thirsty. I only came in because I saw an old friend. Oh, by the way, shopkeeper, is there a mountain god temple around Poyang Town? Mountain god temple? The shopkeeper was stunned and said casually, No, there isn't. I've lived here for more than 20 years. I've never heard of any mountain god temple. How is that possible? Zhang Xiaohua said curiously, I've been there before. It's on a mountain outside the town. Oh, I see. The shopkeeper patted his forehead and said, Dear customer, you're talking about the small temple on Python Mountain, which is more than 10 miles west of the town. That small temple has been abandoned for a long time. As for whether it's a mountain god temple or not, I don't know. If you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have thought of this small temple. It's west of the town. Haha, that's great. As he spoke, Zhang Xiaohua reached into his bosom and took out a silver ingot. He smiled and said, The food is still the same as before. Not bad at all. The last time I came here, I only spent 50 copper coins. This time, no matter what, I cannot be stingy. When the shopkeeper saw the silver ingot, he quickly waved his hand and said, Dear customer, you don't have to be like this. I already said that it's 50% off. You only need to pay 1 silver ingot. 1 silver ingot? Or 50% off? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. When she was at Huanxi Manor, her monthly allowance was only 3 coins. However, now that she thought about it, perhaps her monthly allowance at Huanxi Manor would increase as well. Zhang Xiaohua didn't say much. She threw the silver ingot on the table and stood up to leave. The shopkeeper quickly stood up to send her off. When they reached the entrance of the restaurant, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the street not far away. She turned her head and asked, Oh right, I remember there's a ruffian in town called Brother Fan. I wonder if he's Brother Fan? The shopkeeper was surprised. You even remember this customer? However, that guy didn't have a good ending. 2 years ago, he blackmailed a young master. The young master's family came back to seek revenge. He was buried in the ground and skinned alive. Sigh, the heavens are fair. It's not that they don't want revenge, it's just that it's not time yet. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and leaped onto his horse. Together with Dream, they galloped towards Python Mountain, which was located in the western part of town. Poyang Town. Zhang Xiaohua met her Dream 5 years ago. She also met her second brother who was a bodyguard. Most importantly, She found a money pouch that could store items and a jade slip that could concoct elixirs. That day, Zhang Xiaohua vaguely suspected that Jing Xian came to Poyang Town for the jade slip and the money pouch. Now, he was even more certain that Shirtai came to Poyang Town because she obtained the immortal records of the incense cult. However, Shirtai didn't pass the test in the refining heart cave or didn't obtain the inheritance of the incense cult. Therefore, she couldn't use her divine sense to discover the cave under the mysterious restriction and returned empty-handed. Poyang Town was also the beginning of her dream story. How could Zhang Xiaohua not have a deep impression of it? Zhang Xiaohua and her dream arrived at the town within the time it took to eat a meal. Of course, it was not winter and everything in the fields had changed. Zhang Xiaohua came to Poyang Town from the mountain god temple by following the footprints of martial arts masters. Most of the footprints were in the fields. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't recognize whether it was the mountain he had been to before or not. When they got close, Zhang Xiaohua released her divine sense. Seeing the mountain god temple on the mountain was still shabby, she said with a smile, "It's really here. In my impression, it was a high mountain. Now it looks just like a big mound. Compared with lingering Fragrance Peak, it is really ugly." "Where is the mountain god temple?" Dream asked. "You have to go up the mountain and go around several peaks to see it. Alas, 5 years ago, you were still a child. It's really not easy for you to come down from the mountain." Dream sighed and said, "By the way, I remember that Master told you the way out when we left. How did you get so far away from the town?" Zhang Xiaohua touched her nose and asked, "When Shirtai took you away, how did you get out?" "Nonsense, of course." Dream was stunned when she said this. She laughed and said, "I understand. Master took me there with Qinggong." How did you know Qinggong at that time?" Then her eyes softened and she said, "It's hard for you, Xiaohua. You actually returned to the town from the ferry with your own strength?" "Hee, that's right. I, Xiaoxia, have been outstanding since childhood. Even the teacher of our Guozhuang house didn't dare to accept me. He was afraid that he would lead me astray." Ha ha ha. Dream laughed and her gloominess disappeared. While they were talking, the two of them went up the Python Mountain. After a while, they arrived at the mountain god temple. Zhang Xiaohua released her divine sense and slowly found the direction according to her memory. She pointed at the place where the setting sun fell and said, "Dream, over there is the place where we first met. Please vote, please vote, please collect, please tip, thank you. -4. Chapter 1000. Since Ren Xiaoxia understands, I don't have to explain too much. Bai Yinxiu sneered. "I heard that you have a good relationship with your senior sister Zixia. If I preach the incense cult here, I'm afraid that Jingyi won't allow it. Since you've come to between the clouds and the water, I'll leave her here. You two can live here peacefully for the rest of your lives. Won't that be great?" "Good plan, good plan." Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to clap her hands. "All right, Ren Xiaoxia has contributed a lot to Between the Clouds and the Water. I'll definitely treat him well. If Between the Clouds and the Water can become famous in Jianghu and become the first celestial sect, half of the credit will belong to me and half to Ren Xiaoxia. When that time comes, I'll definitely..." Bai Yinxiu gave her a flirtatious look. "Do I still need to say it?" Zhang Xiaohua had goosebumps all over her body. She almost shivered on the spot. Bai Yinxiu floated in the air and came to the outside of the main hall. As expected, there was no one within 1,000 feet of the main hall. "Men, gather the troops at the Heroes' Gathering Palace. I have something important to do between the clouds and the water." Immediately, there were a few drumbeats. Many disciples, old and young, male and female, came out of nowhere and swarmed into the main hall. Before everyone arrived, Bai Yinxiu asked a disciple to lead Zhang Xiaohua out. Zhang Xiaohua followed the disciple and walked slowly out of the main hall. She turned back to look at Bai Yinxiu, who looked hesitant, and the disciples who were in a hurry. She couldn't help but smile mockingly. This matter really needs to be considered carefully, not only for Between the Clouds and the Water, but also for my Beidou school. Isn't this an opportunity? When Zhang Xiaohua returned to the abode, Meng was already waiting for her. She asked anxiously, "What took you so long? What did the sect leader ask about?" When are we going back? Zhang Xiaohua naturally wouldn't let Ming worry. He only smiled and said, "It's nothing." This so-called sect leader Bai is very interested in our fragrant cult. He even inquires about our senior martial sisters and the cult leader's daily routines. You can think about it, but how would I know? But I was also afraid that she would come and disturb you, so I made up some nonsense. She was so confused that she thought highly of me. She even said that she wanted me to be a guardian disciple of their Shueyun club. How can I do that? After trying to shirk responsibility for a long time, sect leader Bai sighed. He had just given him a banquet and wanted him to drink wine. Haha, his dream was here, and so was his heart. How could he be in the mood to drink wine? I'll come back as soon as possible. Meng burst out laughing. She had long forgotten her previous worries. She pointed at Zhang Xiaohua's forehead and laughed. You are so charming. Nie Qinyu from Rejuvenation Valley is still thinking about you. Zhang Pinger from Distant Fire Temple. Haha, I heard that she is even colder than before. She doesn't speak much to the male disciples. Why did this Bai Zhangmin want you so much the moment he saw you? Why did he give you the guardian disciple position so eagerly? Zhang Xiaohua rubbed her nose and said, I am not talented. My appearance is better than Pan An's. Ha ha ha. Meng seemed to see a flower on Zhang Xiaohua's face. Xiaohua laughed so hard that she almost bent over. I heard that the immortal cultivator who attacked Rejuvenation Valley was very handsome. If that immortal cultivator is you, I can say the same thing. Hee. Zhang Xiaohua shrugged. Anything is possible. I'm dying of laughter. If you are that handsome immortal cultivator, I might be the founder of Fragrance Sect. Zhang Xiaohua was happy to see Ming laughing so hard. She chatted with her for a long time before they went to rest. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged in a quiet room and checked her meridians. Although Bai Yinxiu used the immortal cultivation technique to hit Zhang Xiaohua's acupoints, he was reluctant to use the vital energy in his own meridians. Instead, he used his internal energy to simulate vital energy. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua only used the Worry-Free Heart Sutra to open one of her acupoints. However, Zhang Xiaohua was afraid that Bai Yinxiu would find out the next day. Therefore, she immediately stopped the Heart Sutra and kept the other acupoints in a sealed state. Unexpectedly, when Zhang Xiaohua woke up the next day, she found that all the acupoints in her body had been opened by themselves. She could only smile bitterly and prepare to adapt. The next day, the disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water did not disturb them. They only served them fruits, vegetables, wine, and other food. Mingbai had him and Zhang Xiaohua by his side, so he did not ask any questions. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to go out and see what Bai Yinxiu was doing. However, she was afraid that there was a powerful restriction between the clouds and the water, or that Bai Yinxiu had some secret supernatural power. Therefore, she suppressed her anxiety and found some excuses to use the bewitching pointers on the disciples who served her. She got some information from them about Between the Clouds and the Water. For 3 days, there seemed to be some big movement between the clouds and the water. Bai Yinxiu completely forgot about Zhang Xiaohua and Ming. He was busy appointing and dispatching people. As for what he was busy with, the status of the disciples was limited, so their knowledge was limited. Ming was also anxious. While nagging Zhang Xiaohua, she also urged the disciples. Those disciples only smiled and did not say a word. Ming did not know how to deal with them, so she could only look for trouble with Zhang Xiaohua. On the evening of the 3rd day, Zhang Xiaohua found out from the disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water that most of the disciples Between the Clouds and the Water had left the island. Bai Yinxiu also left the island in the early morning of that day. As for where he went, he still did not know. After waking the disciple, Zhang Xiaohua secretly pondered. Needless to say, Bai Yinxiu must have 2 plans now. One was to return to the Jianghu, and the other was to do what Wan Wuxin said. However, she did not hear what Wan Wuxin said. He only leaked some information in front of her. As for when and where, she did not know. However, according to what Bai Yinxiu said, even if she waited here for a lifetime, it might not happen. Therefore, what Bai Yinxiu wanted to do this time should be to return to the Jianghu Between the Clouds and the Water. This bastard actually wants to turn I into a white-bearded Zhang Xiaohua. How despicable. If I don't cause trouble between the clouds and the water, how can I be worthy of this bastard sealing eyes acupoints? However, Zhang Xiaohua was immediately depressed. Along the way in from outside between the clouds and the water, he could see clearly that without the guidance of the disciples between the clouds and the water, he would not be able to get out easily. If he wanted to get out, he would have to take Ming with him and use the power of flight. However, seeing the thick smoke above the giant island, Zhang Xiaohua was almost certain that the smoke was caused by the formation. Whether the power of flight could get him out was still a problem. Forget it, let's not think too much about it first. Let's destroy between the clouds and the water first. Zhang Xiaohua made up his mind. Just as he was thinking about what to do, he heard Ming shouting, "Xiaohua, where are you?" "Here. I'm talking to this junior brother between the clouds and the water." Zhang Xiaohua replied with a smile. "Xiaohua, it's been 3 days. The time to get back to the fragrant religion is extremely tight. Why don't you hurry to find that by Zhangmin, Liang Cangshu, or Li Su? Didn't you say that they wouldn't touch us even if they had 10 times the courage? Why is it that now? I think they've already set their sights on us." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Don't worry, I've already told that disciple to go back and see Bai Zhangmin immediately. I'll let him tell Bai Zhangmin that if she still wants to make a living in Jianghu, he should quickly send us out of this place. Otherwise, the fragrant religion, the Dalan Temple, and the Tenryu sect will immediately unite and destroy between the clouds and the water once they get the news." "Ah?" Ming covered her mouth and said, "Xiaohua, if you say that, wouldn't their first thought be to kill us to silence us?" Zhang Xiaohua turned pale with fright and said, "Isn't that so? Ming, you're really smart. I didn't think of that." Then, he muttered, "But this is good too. We can't live together, but we can die together." "Bah." Ming's face turned red and she spat, "You're really not serious. Hurry up and catch up with that disciple." "Yes, I'll go now." Zhang Xiaohua solemnly stood up and ran out of the room. "Be careful." Ming's concerned words chased after Zhang Xiaohua's buttocks. Zhang Xiaohua didn't leave the abode, and he went underground. When he came out, he changed his face and looked like the handsome, immortal cultivator. He hid his body and floated in the air. Zhang Xiaohua released his divine sense openly. There was a faint white fog in the air above the giant island. It was thicker than the daytime. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense was bounced back when it came in contact with the white fog. He couldn't leave the island. Just as Zhang Xiaohua thought, he couldn't use the flying technique to leave the island. Moreover, the giant island was surrounded by a pool with restrictions. Zhang Xiaohua only knew how to use the earth and fire escape techniques. He had only heard of the water escape technique. How could he escape from the water? "It seems like I have to break the restriction in the sky." Zhang Xiaohua muttered to himself for a moment before he released his divine sense to examine the origin of the smoke. Who knew that after looking at it for a long time, he only felt that the smoke was seamless without any flaws. Zhang Xiaohua also couldn't see what kind of array this smoke was, so he couldn't help but scratch his head a little. At this moment, in the distant lights, there was a faint sound of clappers. It seemed to be the sound of a night watch. Zhang Xiaohua's heart suddenly moved. He pinched a spell and went to the light. The light came from the main hall whereby Yinxiu asked Zhang Xiaohua about the matter. There were many rooms and pavilions behind it. There was a large patch of darkness in the brightly lit area. It was a palace with carved beams and painted pillars. However, there were very few rooms with lights. According to Zhang Xiaohua's guess, this must be Bai Yinxiu's residence. If he wanted to find out the secret of the fog array, he would have to start from Bai Yinxiu's residence. "Please vote for me. Please add me. Please tip me. Thank you." -4. Chapter 1001. Jingyi smiled but didn't say anything. Taking the Misty School into the incense cult and releasing the Misty School into the incense cult was all planned by her. She had always been in control and never revealed anything to her juniors. Firstly, this matter involved a lot of people. If it was leaked, it wouldn't be a surprise attack. Secondly, this matter was related to the opening of the incense cult's formation. There was still a long time before the incense cult would leave Jianghu, so it would be useless to say anything earlier. Now that she heard her juniors praise her, even though she was the cult leader, she could tell that Jing Fan's praise came from the bottom of her heart. How could she not smile? This subordinate has just learned of cult leaders' actions. Please don't blame me for making wild guesses. Junior sister Jing Fan, please speak. I think everyone has doubts in their hearts. Let's not talk about it now and listen to your opinions. Actually, this subordinate thinks that cult leaders' actions are the best for both public and private reasons. As Hall Leader Yang said, she wants to lead the Misty School in Shirshine Peak, but is powerless. Furthermore, the Misty School is in an awkward position and doesn't fit in with the incense cult's outer sect. It can't be pacified without decades. Moreover, the old, weak, sick, and disabled of the Misty School. Haha, they are younger than us, but their tempers are much worse than ours. If we kill them all, Hall Leader Yang will fight us to the death. It's better for everyone if cult leader lets go like this. Secondly, the Misty School is one of the major sects of the Immortal Path. It has existed together with the Incense Cult and the Shindao sect since ancient times. The Shindao sect has already perished, and the Misty School is also declining. If we can rebuild the Misty School, it will be like a phoenix rising from the ashes and rising from the ashes. Cult leaders' actions are not only upholding the orthodoxy of the Immortal Path, but also fulfilling the obligations of the Immortal Path. If the Misty School perishes, even if it is merged into the Incense Cult, 2 of the 3 sects of the Immortal Path will be gone. I'm afraid it won't sound good. Moreover, among the 3 sects of the Immortal Tao, if our Incense Cult is isolated in Jianghu, we won't be able to balance ourselves against the Dalan Temple and the Tenryu sect. We'll only be at a disadvantage. Furthermore, ever since the Alliance of the Righteous Path emerged from the Path of Immortals, they have always considered themselves as a super sect in the Jianghu. They have always wanted to surpass our Incense sect and have a place in the Path of Immortals. During the attack on the Misty School, they acted in secret and killed 2 of the 6 Misty Tigers without permission. They tore apart the relationship between our Incense sect and the Dalan Temple and the Misty School, causing our Incense sect to be in a passive position. We had no choice but to do things and decisions that our Lord Hierarch did not want to do. Moreover, the Alliance of the Righteous Tao had been developing rapidly in the past few years. They had occupied the Misty Peak and were about to surpass the Dalan Temple. Although there was no news of them joining the Immortal Tao, it would not be difficult for them to gain a place in the Immortal Tao in the future. If Lord Sect Leader releases the Misty School and rebuilds it, it would be the heaviest blow to the Righteous Alliance. Sister Jing Fan's analysis is very reasonable. Is there anything else? That's all I can think of. Perhaps Lord Sect Leader has other ideas. What about everyone else? Is there anything else you want to add? Abbess Jing, he looked at the people around her with interest. Lord Sect Leader, this disciple has something to say. Peacock smiled. Speak freely. Yes, Lord Sect Leader. Peacock said, since ancient times, there has always been a tripartite balance. Only the tripartite balance can be maintained. Although the Incense sect, the Dalan Temple, the Tenryu sect, and the Alliance of the Righteous Tao exist, the Tenryu sect is above the rest. The Alliance of the Righteous Tao is a martial arts sect. Only the Incense sect and the Dalan Temple are immortal Tao heritages. Although our 2 sects have some ties, as Master said, the Dalan Temple and the Incense sect share the same origins. There may be other conflicts, and the Alliance of the Righteous Tao is one of the legs. However, the Alliance of the Righteous Tao is too ambitious and only covets the resources of the Immortal Tao. Therefore, although the Misty School has long been in decline, it has always been under the protection of the Incense sect and the Dalan Temple. I believe the Dalan Temple has the same intentions as the Incense sect. During the Battle of the Misty School, the Incense sect and the Dalan Temple suffered a setback from the Alliance of the Righteous Tao. They had no choice but to swallow the bitter pill and cut off one of their legs. This time, the rebuilding of the Misty School will bring the order of the Jianghu back to its previous stable path, killing many birds with one stone. Abbess Jingyi nodded. Peacock is becoming more mature. This analysis has been raised to the level of survival in the Jianghu. It's very good. I can rest assured that the Incense sect will be handed over to you in the future. This disciple wouldn't dare. It's just a wild guess. Peacock said humbly. Actually, the most important thing is that the destruction of the Misty School was not our intention. It was only because of Zhang San from the Alliance of the Righteous Tao that we had no choice but to continue. That's why we had already planned to do so when we were at Misty Peak. Everything that happened in the future was just a matter of taking advantage of the situation. Now that the incense sect can return to the Jianghu, this wish must be fulfilled in advance. Otherwise, won't Ruping blame us for the rest of her life? Master, young Ruping was almost in tears. All right, Oh Yin, you've been listening for a long time. You should have understood much of what Elder Jingfan and Peacock said. Do you still blame us in your heart? Other than Abbess Shuezhen, who remained silent, everyone else was stunned. Zhang Xiaohu even turned his head in astonishment. Sure enough, outside Emotian's palace, a thin and weak-looking woman walked in. It was Oh Yin, who had just recovered from her illness. Oh Yin looked much better than when Zhang Xiaohua saw her. However, her face was still pale. It was unknown whether it was because the incense sect members had brought up the past, or because she was still sick. Oh Yin walked into Emotian's palace and stood in the main hall. She raised her head and looked at everyone coldly. Even Zhang Xiaohu, an old acquaintance, did not say anything. Young Ruping, needless to say, was like a stranger. Then, Oh Yin bowed slightly and said, "Greetings, Abbess." Abbess Jingyi was silent for a moment. She waved her hand and said, "Sit down." "I don't dare. How can there be a seat for me in the incense sect?" Oh Yin shook her head slightly. "You little girl," Abbess Jingyi smiled bitterly. "Just now, I asked others to make it clear that O Peng's death was caused by Zhang San from the Righteous Alliance. Changsheng and I were only kidnapped. The Righteous Alliance is the real culprit behind the destruction of the Misty School. If you want to give face to others, you should go to the Righteous Peak. Moreover, little girl, I'm the leader of the sect. You should be grateful that I'm giving you face." Yes, Shirtai's words are very reasonable. However, I'm only a woman with the strength to truss a chicken. I can't wield a saber or a sword, so I can only use this expression to express my preferences. I only hate that I'm not at the Righteous Peak. Otherwise, with just my gaze, I would have pierced 70, 80 holes in that Zhang San. Ha ha ha. Abbess Jingyi clapped her hands and laughed. However, although Abbess's words are reasonable, but what is done, whether intentional or not, as long as there is a cause, there will be an effect. No matter how Abbess explains, my brother can't be resurrected. Yang, my sister-in-law can't live happily for the rest of her life. Yang Ruping almost couldn't believe her ears when she heard Oh Yin call her sister-in-law. In this world, besides Oh Peng, only Oh Yin was related to her by blood. Over the past few years, Oh Yin had treated her as a passerby, which made her very sad. Now that she heard Oh Yin call her sister-in-law, she felt that her persistence and strength over the past few years had not been in vain. Hearing young Ruping's cry, Oh Yin turned her head and said indifferently, "Sister-in-law, I heard what you said outside the hall just now. I also know that you've been wrong these years. Although there are too many twists and turns in this matter, these years in the Shershin Peak have made me temporarily think things through. I'll call you sister-in-law in the future, but it doesn't mean that I forgive you." I know. Young Ruping said hurriedly, "You don't need to say more. I know what I'm doing. To be able to hear you call me sister-in-law in this life is already worthy of your brother's trust." Zhang Xiaohu sighed at the side, while Gao Kunheng was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. At this time, Abbess Jingyi asked again, "Oh Yin, I'll let the Misty School people out to reunite in the Misty Peak and rebuild the Misty School. What do you think?" "It's all Abbess's arrangement. I have no objections," Oh Yin said calmly. "However, in this, I still need your help. Are you willing?" Abbess Jingyi said enigmatically. Me? Not only Oh Yin, but everyone else in the hall was surprised. "What can I do?" Oh Yin shook her head slightly. "Could it be that Abbess wants me to be the leader of some Misty School?" Gao Kunheng covered his mouth. His heart skipped a beat and his face turned ashen. Of course, Oh Yin was the rightful leader. How is that possible? Abbess Jingyi ignored Oh Yan's sneer and said, "You don't have any martial arts skills." Although you have experience in managing Huanxi Manor, you're still too weak to lead a group of heroes. I would rather choose Ru Ping than you. But wouldn't it be easier to control the Misty School? Oh Yen sneered. Hee hee, you're right, little girl. Of course, my fragrance order wants to control the Misty School, but we also want to control the people of Jianghu to be convinced. If I let you be the leader of the Misty School, wouldn't it be a big loss of face for my fragrance order? Hee hee, Oh Yen sneered. Abbess, you're afraid that I'm too popular. There will be too many old members of the Misty School in the future, and it'll be difficult to control them? Ha ha ha. Abbess Jingy laughed. The Misty School is a declining sect. It's nothing in my eyes. Oh Yen, you're just a frog in a well. I don't have the strength to truss up a chicken. Abbess, you're right. You little girl, you're stubborn. Abbess Jingy smiled bitterly. Oh right, I heard that you were seriously ill some time ago. Have you recovered? Thank you for sending the godly doctor to treat me. I'm much better now. That's good. I was worried about your health a few days ago. You're fine now. It didn't affect my plans. Abbess Jingy said bluntly. I wouldn't dare. I'm flattered that you think so highly of me. Then, you don't want to see Peng's Misty School rebuilt? Please vote monthly. Please vote recommendation. Please collect. Please tip. Thank you. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote. -4. Chapter 1002. That's not the case. It's just that, what's the difference between an ethereal sect that's not a disciple of the ethereal sect and an ethereal hall that's a disciple of the ethereal sect? Haha, these are all my considerations. Do you think you have the power to control them? Nun Jingyi sneered. I'll ask you one more time. If you don't want to rebuild the Misty School, then pretend that I didn't call you here today. Oh Yan's ambition was higher than the sky, but her life was still as fragile as paper. Now that she was under someone else's roof, how could she not lower her head? Oh Yan thought for a moment and nodded. If you insist on rebuilding, I'll help you. Good. Nanjing clapped her hands and said, You're indeed Peng's sister. You're able to pick up and let go. You're not inferior to men. None. I'm flattered. Please continue. Okay, wait a moment. Nanjing waved her hand again and said, Where's Ming Qing? I'm here. Ming Qing shouted and came in from outside the hall. He bowed and said, Greetings, sect leader. Good. Have you completed the task I gave you? Sect leader, the time was too short. The disciples of Wuming Hall have some foundation in martial arts, but they're still a little far from what you said. I failed you. It's okay. I didn't expect the sect protecting formation to be opened at this time. The time I gave you was the time for the next restriction formation to loosen. It's not your fault. Now, according to what you said, as long as we secretly attack Misty Peak, there shouldn't be a big problem. Everyone was shocked once again. At this moment, they finally understood that releasing the Misty sect had been a plan all along. Yes, sect leader, you're right. I don't think there's any problem. Okay, then, I'll appoint you as the deputy sect leader of the Misty School. Send all the disciples of Dragon Creek Valley to the Misty School and you'll be in charge. Yes, I understand. Ming Qing was obviously confused by Nun Jingyi's words, but he didn't dare to question it. He only bowed and obeyed. You're the vice faction leader, so you need to listen to the faction leader of the Misty School. I've ordered you to focus on the matters of the Misty School. I understand. All right, you may leave. Prepare for the next few days. In 3 days, gather all the disciples of the Misty School you belong to at the Jinghai Lakeside. Your disciple obeys. Ming Qing didn't say much. He turned and left. With this Wuming Hall disciple as a disciple of the Misty School, Oh Yen, do you think we can take down the Misty Mountain Villa? That's natural. The outer sect disciples of the fragrant cult are famous all over the world. How could they not take down the Misty Mountain Villa? Oh Yen emphasized the words, outer sect disciples of the fragrant cult. Haha, there are no early birds in the world. If there are no benefits, how can our school send an outer sect disciple to join your Misty School? Nun Jingyi didn't mind at all. I'm only letting you see because I want to make it clear to you. If you want to rebuild the Misty School, the first thing you need to do is to rely on my incense cult. Of course, You have to rely on me secretly. What's the difference between that and not building it? Of course, there's an absolute difference. Nun Jingyi said, if we don't rebuild it, in 10 years, not only will the Jianghu forget about the Misty School, but even the disciples of the Misty School will forget about it. Moreover, if we don't rebuild it now, I'm afraid there won't be any reasonable excuse to rebuild it in the future. Of course, only when the Misty School is rebuilt will it be the Misty School. If it's in the Serene Peak, it will always be the Misty Hall. Yin was silent. Nun Jingyi was absolutely right. Although the Misty Hall and the Misty School were only one word apart, there was an essential difference. Moreover, the Serene Peak and the Misty Peak were completely different. How could Yin resist such a temptation? All right, the little girl should have agreed to the first condition. Let's talk about the second condition. Nun Jingyi narrowed her eyes. I'm sure you know why my incense cult is participating in the Righteous Alliance's plan to attack the Misty School. When Yin heard this, her heart thumped wildly. Of course, she didn't know this in the past, but after meeting Zhang Xiaohua, she knew everything clearly. However, her expression was still indifferent. This little girl has already told Abbess countless times. Abbess has also sent people to search countless times. There is only one answer, and that is this little girl doesn't know. Well, perhaps you really don't know. Otherwise, you would have given yourself away in the past few years. Moreover, I may have a way to extort a confession. Once I use it, you may be able to keep your life. But even an idiot won't be able to escape. How can I destroy a flower so ruthlessly? However, even if you don't know now, you'll know in the future. So, let's talk about it now. Please speak, Nun. It's very simple. My incense cult doesn't necessarily have the item that belongs to the Misty School. However, when my incense cult needs it, your Misty School must take it out at any time and cooperate with my incense cult. That's simple? Yin asked curiously. Yes, it's that simple. Nun Jingyi said without hesitation. Your Misty School has been destroyed for so long, and there's still no trace of that item. It seems that if your Misty School doesn't have it in its hands, my incense cult won't be able to get it. Yin nodded. Although I don't know what it is, I promise that as long as my Misty School participates in this matter, we'll also benefit. My Misty School will definitely cooperate with your incense cult. Good. Nun Jingyi clapped her hands again. As for the last condition, I'm sure the little girl will agree to it. I'll congratulate you first. That's not necessarily true. Please enlighten me, Nun. Otherwise, I don't know where my happiness comes from. I really want to be a matchmaker for once. I'll pull a red string for you and arrange a marriage for you. Eh? Yin couldn't help but ask in surprise. Nun, what do you mean? Nun Jingyi smiled. Your sister-in-law isn't willing to be the leader of the Misty School, and you don't have the ability to be the leader of the Misty School. So, I'll naturally choose a leader of the Misty School. But he's not the rightful leader of the Misty School. How can he become the leader? If you marry this person, then you'll have the best reason. Not to mention Yin. Even everyone was extremely shocked. Yes, only Gao Kunheng was shocked, but at the same time, he was also extremely happy. It was as if he had eaten a grass-return pill. The tens of thousands of pores on his body opened up, and it was extremely tight. He only wanted to rush forward, hug the leader's thigh, and call her mother. Not only did she give him the position of leader, but she also gave him a lovely wife. If she wasn't related by blood, then what was she? Moreover, although Yin was thin, she had the foundation of a beauty. She also had the gentleness and determination that the female disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak couldn't compare to. Gao Kunheng's soul had long been stolen away by her. Everyone else, including Peacock, also looked at Gao Kunheng. Although Gao Kunheng was also handsome, they all had the same thought in their minds. All the good food has been eaten by the pigs. But they didn't know what to do. How can this be? Yin looked at Gao Kunheng. Her face was also slightly red. She said anxiously, Leader, you can settle this with just a word. Why do you want me to humiliate myself like this? Of course, I can settle everything in spreading fragrance cult with just a word. But I can't cover the mouths of the people in Jianghu. If you want the Misty School to leave spreading fragrance cult in a clean and steady way, you still have to make this choice. Then, Nanjingyi looked again and said curiously, besides, Zhang Xiaohu is also very handsome. He's even younger than you by a few years. How can you humiliate yourself like this? I thought this was a marriage bestowed by the heavens. But he what? Zhang Xiaohu? No. Oyen was about to refuse when she suddenly realized something. She looked at Zhang Xiaohu with even more astonishment. She didn't know what to say. What? When Gao Kunheng heard this, he immediately fell from the highest heavens. His face was pale, and his mouth was filled with bitterness. He knew that Aunt Qin didn't come, but he didn't expect that he would completely forget about Zhang Xiaohu, who was a generation younger than him. Seeing Gao Kunheng like this, Nanjingyi smiled. Oh Yin, you? Don't tell me you want Gao Kunheng to be the leader of Misty School? Gao Kunheng, your disciple is here. I'll appoint you as the deputy leader of Misty School. You'll assist Zhang Xiaohu in managing all the chores in the sect. Do you understand? Your disciple understands. Gao Kunheng's lips trembled for a long time before he finally spoke. He looked extremely dejected. It was far from the ecstasy he had hoped for when he was appointed as the deputy leader of Misty School. As the saying went, the greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. If Nanjingyi had announced Gao Kunheng as the deputy leader of Misty School, wouldn't he have gone crazy with joy? Didn't he work so hard in Ethereal Hall because he wanted to make a name for himself? Once he left Incense Cult and arrived at Ethereal Peak, he would be second only to one person and above all. He would be free and unfettered. Leaving his name in the martial world was his dream. However, he had been kept in suspense by Nanjingyi. First, it was the position of leader. Now it was Oyen. He had already planned his future. Of course, the contrast in his heart was too great. Gao Kunheng, you don't seem happy? Nanjingyi frowned. No, your disciple is too happy. Gao Kunheng hurriedly covered it up. Thank you for your kindness. All right. You should go and inform Deputy Hall Chief Qin of Ethereal Hall. Also, pass down our order. Aunt Qin is also the deputy leader of Misty School. The two of you should take care of everything in the Shershin Peak and gather at the Kamsi Lake in 3 days. Now that the news of the Fragrant Religion opening has not spread, it is a good opportunity for you to go out. No one will know. If you wait a few days, it will be troublesome. Yes, your disciple will go back now. Gao Kunheng bowed. He looked to the side and asked tentatively, what about Hall Chief Yang and Sect Leader Zhang? From today onwards, Hall Chief Yang is no longer the Hall Chief of Ethereal Hall. She will return to Lingering Fragrance Peak as a disciple of Emotion Hall. Sect Leader Zhang? Haha, you don't seem to be ready yet. Gao Kunheng looked. Of course, Zhang Xiaohu was standing there with his mouth agape. Gao Kunheng didn't know what he was thinking. Therefore, Gao Kunheng cursed in his heart. This thing that stepped on dog shit. Why didn't I step on it when I went out? Please vote for me. Please vote for me. Please keep it. Please tip me. Thank you. -4. Chapter 1003. After Gao Kunheng left, Zhang Xiaohu still hadn't come to his senses. This was really inconceivable. Although he wanted to be the leader, everything he did was to lay the foundation for the future. He never thought that he would be promoted to such a high position by Nanjingyi. Zhang Xiaohu, are you so happy that you've lost your mind? Qinshan frowned. Zhang Xiaohu came to his senses and immediately stood up. Leader, this is unacceptable. I'm incompetent. How can I be the leader of the Misty School? I know that your martial arts are too inferior. Even the 3 beauties of Misty School are not among them. Your seniority is too low. Above you are Wen Hai, Xueqing, Lu Yueming, and above you are Li Jian, Hu Yuni, and Lu Qingyang. You are not legitimate. Although you are a direct disciple, the chief disciple of the Misty School is Zhang Chengyue, not Wen Hai. Even the little brat Tian, who has been training by Hu Yuni's side, is Zhang Chengyue's disciple. He is more legitimate than you. Zhang Xiaohu was sweating profusely. He nodded and said, That's right. I asked Jiao Zhu to take back your order. Do you think I've been planning for so long? Abbess Jingyi scolded. This sect has already bestowed upon you the Plain Expanse Heart Sutra and 3 Plain Expanse pellets. However, looking at your martial arts cultivation, your aptitude is really lacking. You should work harder in the future. Yes, you're right. Zhang Xiaohu wiped his sweat and secretly praised Zhang Xiaohua. As long as you practice the Suhuan Heart Sutra, you will soon succeed. Martial arts no longer exist. Besides, as long as you marry Yin, your status will change. Who else is more qualified than you to be the leader of the Misty School? Even if your martial arts are not good, who can say no? Besides, even though I can't cover the entire Jianghu with just one sentence from the incense cult's cult master, I can still make you a sect master in the Misty School. That should still be possible. But, Zhang Xiaohu argued, I'm Wen Wenhai's disciple, and I'm also the grand disciple of sect leader O Peng. Compared to Miss Ouyang, I'm more than 1 generation lower. Nonsense, do you think I don't know? Don't forget that you're a disciple of the Shirtai of Chuanxiang cult. In terms of seniority, you're in the same generation as Ru Ping, which means you're in the same generation as O Peng. Why can't you marry O Yin? Zhang Xiaohu was dumbfounded. He didn't expect that being a disciple of the Shirtai would have such a meaning. How is it? Zhang Xiaohu, I've already paved the way for you. You just need to marry O Yin into the Zhang family and be a good groom, and be a sect master. After that, Nun Jingyi ignored Zhang Xiaohu and turned to ask, O Yin, what do you think of my cult's arrangement? O Yin thought that Nun Jingyi was talking about Gao Kunheng. He was a disciple of the incense cult, so he would resist whatever she said. As for Zhang Xiaohu, even though he was a country bumpkin whom she had looked down on previously, it could be said that there was some fate between them. Through her recommendation, he entered Ethereal Sect. Even though his seniority was much lower than hers, but, in terms of age, they were about the same, so they could be considered to be a match made in heaven. Furthermore, the two of them had Zhang Xiaohua as an acquaintance, so they knew each other very well. Moreover, Oyin already had a plan in mind. Zhang Xiaohua was mysterious and had saved her life many years ago. Now, he was even more powerful. He could easily cure an illness that even the miracle doctor at Lingering Fragrance Peak couldn't cure. According to Elder Yu, Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts were unfathomable. As long as she married Zhang Xiaohu, Zhang Xiaohua would be bound to the Misty School's worship. If they fell out with the incense cult in the future, the Misty School wouldn't be afraid of anything. At least they had the capital to be unyielding. After thinking about it, Oyen blushed and looked at Zhang Xiaohu in a different light. Good. Nun Jingyi was very sensitive and saw the change in Oyen's expression. She clapped her hands and said, since Miso has agreed to these 3 things, then the sect. But at this moment, Zhang Xiaohu said, Sect leader, I have some objections. These words were very soft and not unusually resolute. Oyen frowned slightly and her expression changed. What? Zhang Xiaohu, what do you want to say? Nun Jingyi said unhappily, the sect promoted you from an ordinary disciple to the chief disciple of the Misty Hall. Now, I've promoted you to the leader of the Misty School. What else are you dissatisfied with? No, Zhang Xiaohu explained. There's nothing wrong with it. A real man has to make a decision and give up. If you can't do something with an indomitable spirit, even if you have a lovely girl, you won't be famous in Jianghu. In the end, who will remember you? A disciple of the Misty School? Besides, the sect has already made it clear to you. If it weren't for the sect leader, you could only hide behind others. How could you have the chance to covet the position of the Misty School's leader? For you, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You have to think it over. Also, didn't you join the Misty School to do something great in Jianghu? Now, Gao Kunheng is in charge of the Misty School's chores and Ming Qing is in charge of the external affairs of the Misty School. You only need to coordinate the disciples of the Misty School and the Misty School, and you can make the Misty School flourish. You've fulfilled sect leader O's last wish and washed away the shame of the Misty School. Zhang Xiaohu, aren't you tempted by such a gratifying thing? Zhang Xiaohu was speechless. Nun Jingyi's words hit the nail on the head. In a man's heart, he only needed to nod his head, and he could get something that he couldn't get in his life. How could he not be tempted? But Zhang Xiaohu immediately thought of Chang'e and even Chen Chun. But could he nod his head? Could he easily bow his head? Seeing Zhang Xiaohu's hesitation, Nanjingyi said, "The sect leader convinces people with virtue. In this case, Chang'e, come out." Ah, Chang'e? Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu turned his head and looked for her. He remembered that when Nanjingyi found him at Serene Peak, he was still with Chang'e. He didn't hear that she was going to come over. Chang'e didn't come in from outside the palace. Instead, she came out from a jade screen behind Nanjingyi. She should have heard everything here. Looking at her face, Xiao Tianzi couldn't tell what kind of expression she had. She was neither happy nor angry, but her face was as gloomy as water. "Chang'e, when did you come?" Why didn't I know?" Zhang Xiaohu said with a little guilty conscience. When Yin saw Chang'e come in, she couldn't help frowning. She had always been in Huanqi Villa behind Serene Peak and didn't know much about Misty Hall. How could she know about Zhang Xiaohu and Chang'e? She only saw Chang'e in the convoy going south, so she still remembered her. But at this time, seeing Chang'e come in and hearing Zhang Xiaohu's words, how could she not know what had happened? "How is it, Chang'e? I've told you before, men, when faced with a choice between a gang and a relationship, will always choose the gang." Although Zhang Xiaohu hasn't said it out loud, I believe that even if he was given another 10,000 chances to choose, he will definitely choose Yin, not you. Moreover, Chang'e, don't forget that Zhang Xiaohu chose Yin, which means he chose to lead you and shoulder the burden of rebuilding the Misty School. This is the expectation of all the disciples of the Misty School. Why have you been restless in Serene Peak for several years? Isn't it just to go back to Misty Peak? Now, as long as you let go gently, everything will come true. Letting go may be the happiest choice for Zhang Xiaohu. Chang'e looked at Zhang Xiaohu and then at Yin. Her face was filled with grief, and 2 lines of tears flowed from her eyes. She wiped her eyes, sniffed her nose, and forced a smile. "Sect leader, you are mistaken. Didn't I say before? The relationship between Zhang Xiaohu and I is pure senior sister and junior brother. You have to force me to intervene. Won't you spoil the good mood of Miss O and sect leader Zhang?" "Haha, very good." Jingyi Nun nodded and said, "It's not that I'm being unreasonable, but Zhang Xiaohu's matter is unusual. If he marries Yin, he can't change his mind in the future. Otherwise, I can't explain it to Ruping, and the Misty School can't explain it to the whole Jianghu. So, I have no choice." "Sect leader, don't think too much. I'm just an ordinary woman. I can't compare with Miss O's precious body. Sect leader, you should worry more about them." "I'll leave now," Chang'e said very indifferently. She tried her best to plan for Zhang Xiaohu. She wanted her beloved to have a great career, and also to let her face be proud and have someone to rely on for the rest of her life. But she didn't expect that everything she had was taken away by a few words. All her efforts were in vain. What disappointed her most was that although her beloved Zhang Xiaohu didn't say the last words, how could she not understand? She lost her beloved. She lost everything in the future. But even though Chang'e resented fate, she couldn't bring herself to resent Zhang Xiaohu. Jingyi Nun's conditions were too shocking. As a disciple of the Misty School, she almost had to raise both hands and feet in agreement. But she had long since accepted it in her heart. She still had to make a final struggle, a meaningless struggle. She wanted to hear it with her own ears and see her beloved's choice with her own eyes. Perhaps a moment of evasiveness or a pretense of modesty could give her temporary comfort. But when she got closer, Chang'e realized the cruelty of this choice. Chang'e couldn't hold back her tears. She finally endured the heart-wrenching pain and chose to leave. Leave Zhang Xiaohu, leave Imo Xiangong, leave. Where to leave? She didn't have a goal in mind. She just wanted to leave, simply leave, as far away as possible. Watching Chang'e's silhouette walk further and further away, the more lonely it seemed. Everyone's mood was different. Just as Chang'e was about to walk out of the palace gate, 2 voices rang out at the same time. "Chang'e, wait for me. Chang'e, wait for me." Chang'e looked back blankly. It was Yin and Zhang Xiaohu who spoke at the same time. -4. Chapter 1004. Although he was surprised that Yin also spoke, Zhang Xiaohu did not wait for Yin to speak. He quickly walked to Changa's side, raised his hand, and grabbed Changa's hand. Unexpectedly, Changa shook off his hand with force. Zhang Xiaohu reached out and grabbed her again. Changa used force and shook off his hand again. Zhang Xiaohu reached out and grabbed her again. They shook off each other more than 10 times in a row. In the end, Changa could not bear it anymore. She turned around and threw herself into Zhang Xiaohu's arms. Tears gushed out of her eyes, and she choked with sobs and said, "Xiaohu, I know I should congratulate you. This is yours, mine, and the wish of thousands of Misty School's disciples. But I can't help but feel heartache. My heart seems to be easily torn apart. Leader, she doesn't want me to disturb you, but I can't help but think of you, think of your kindness to me, and think of everything about you. I really can't bear to part with you." Zhang Xiaohu's eyes were also red, but they flashed with determination. He smiled, stroked Changa's long hair in his arms, and said, "Don't worry, Changa. We will never be separated, no matter in the past, present, or future." Changa knew that he was comforting her, so she held Zhang Xiaohu's hair tighter. She just wanted to keep him for a while longer. Unexpectedly, Zhang Xiaohu turned around and said, "Leader, I have already made my choice. I have seen it. Are you sure?" Master Jingyi was slightly angry. "Yes, leader. I'm just a country bumpkin who occasionally had the opportunity to enter Misty School. Although I didn't stay in Misty School for a long time, I met Changa in this short period of time. After having Changa, my life was completely colorful. No matter whether it was happiness, anger, sorrow, or joy, Changa accompanied me. She has become an indispensable part of my life. Without her, my life would definitely be incomplete. Without Changa, I wouldn't be Zhang Xiaohu." Later, Zhang Xiaohu said to Yin with a smile, "This disciple was able to enter the Misty School because of Miss O's recommendation. I have nothing to repay her. Now, I have failed to live up to Miss O's expectations and shirked the heavy responsibility of entering the Misty School. However, Changa and I are of the same mind. No matter how difficult it is, we will go through it hand in hand. So, I hope Miss O can forgive me." Hearing this, Yin smiled and said, "Zhang Xiaohu, treat Changa well. You don't blame me for recommending you in the early years." Then, he turned to Nun Jingyi and said, "Nun, I can only agree to the first 2 of your 3 conditions. As for the 3rd condition, I'm sure you've seen it for yourself. I'm not the only one who doesn't agree to it. Even the chief disciple of my Misty School doesn't agree to it." "Ha ha ha." Nun Jingyi was so angry that she laughed and scolded, "You little brats, you don't know the power of my incense cult's rules. What is the 2nd rule of my incense cult? No disciple in the entire incense cult's 19 peaks can go against my cult. How dare you not listen to my orders? How bold." "Nun." Yang Rupiying was shocked and said, "Nun, don't be angry. Why don't you persuade Zhang Xiaohu and Yin, or think of other ways? My cult's decree has already been issued. In 3 days, the army will leave Dianqi Lake. How can it be changed?" Nun Jingyi smiled grimly and said, "Unless these people die in the hall today, my cult will have room to maneuver." Zhang Xiaohu, Yin, Changa, Yang Rupiying shouted anxiously, "You wait. Don't you want to live? Why don't you quickly apologize to the cult leader?" "Sister-in-law, don't worry. I'm just struggling at death's door. I don't care about my life. It's just a matter of time. Master Yang, as long as you're with Changa, even if you die, what is there to be afraid of?" Changa looked up at Zhang Xiaohu with admiration. She only held his arm tighter and said no more. "Haha, killing you is just a piece of cake. Master, please be merciful. Misty Hall only has these few outstanding disciples. Moreover, my late husband only has this one sister. Please be merciful." Yang Rupiying almost fell to the ground. "Cult leader, do you have to do this? Just change to someone else." Chin Chun pouted as if she was thinking of her life and death parting with someone. Peacock also said, "Cult leader, in my opinion, why don't both sides take half a step back? After all, the feelings between these 2 people are also sincere." Abish Jing-yi could ignore Yang Rupiying's opinion, but she had to consider Peacock and Chun Chen's opinions. However, Peacock only wanted Oyan and Zhang Xiaohu to be a couple and Chang'e to be Oyan's concubine. However, Nun Jing-yi seemed to have misunderstood. She pondered for a while and nodded. All right, since that's the case, I'll give you one more chance. After that, she called a disciple over and whispered a few words. Not long after, the disciple brought 2 small wine cups and placed them on the table. Oyan, Chang'e, there are 2 wine cups here. One is poisonous and the other is non-poisonous. Since you insist on forcing me, I'll make you pay a little price. Each of you can choose a cup. Whoever chooses the non-poisonous one will marry Zhang Xiaohu. Whoever chooses the poisonous one will have to apologize. This is what you asked for. Whether I choose or not, I won't marry Zhang Xiaohu. Why do you have to do this, Nun? Hee. If you don't choose, there's only one outcome, death. If you choose, there's still a 50% chance of survival. At this time, Chang'e gradually calmed down. She took a big stride forward and picked up a wine cup. Cult leader, I choose first. If there's poison, I hope you can let Xiaohu and Miso be together. If there's no poison, without waiting for Chang'e to finish, Zhang Xiaohu used ethereal steps and pressed on Chang'e's acupuncture point. He snatched the wine cup and drank it. He smiled. Chang'e's choice is my choice. If I don't drink for her, who else can drink for her? Then, he picked up the remaining cup and drank it as well. He said, Young Lady O is faction leader O's younger sister. Her choice is also my choice, so I can only drink it for her. Good man, good disciple. Nun Jing-yi clapped her hands and sighed. I didn't expect. There would be times when I'm blind. I really didn't expect that in this world, besides Mo Qingshan and Ren Xiaoyao, there would be men like you, Zhang Xiaohu, who would not hesitate to lose their lives for their loved ones. Alas, since you can make this choice, how can I not help you? Ah, Zhang Xiaohu was overjoyed. He didn't dare to believe it. Cult leader, are you really? Zhang Xiaohu, why aren't you thanking the cult leader? Yuyan was also anxious this time. She couldn't help but shout. Yes. Thank you, cult leader. Zhang Xiaohu bowed and thanked her. But Zhang Xiaohu's status is not legitimate. How will you deal with it? Oyan asked softly. Hee, how difficult can it be? Nun Jing-yi raised her head. Who will listen to my words? I'd like to see who in the entire Jianghu dares to compete with me. Then, she chuckled. Miso, did you also call me cult leader? Hee, Nun is perceptive and knows how to make good use of people. Perhaps you can be called cult leader. Ha. Nun Jing-yi laughed loudly. Everyone in the hall was also happy to see this happy ending. However, just as Zhang Xiaohu was laughing, a sharp pain suddenly rose from his stomach. Ouch! Zhang Xiaohu was in so much pain that his face turned pale. Large beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. He immediately clutched his stomach and lay on the ground. Xiaohu, what happened to you? Chang'e was at a loss and hurried forward to support him. However, Zhang Xiaohu was in so much pain that Chang'e couldn't support him. Zhang Xiaohu held his stomach and rolled on the ground. Only after the time it took to drink a cup of tea did he stop. When Chang'e helped him sit down, Zhang Xiaohu's clothes were already soaked. His eyes were full of exhaustion, and he had no strength in his body. Hee. Nun Jingyi laughed. Zhang Xiaohu, are you still thinking about the story in the play? 2 wine cups, 1 poisonous and 1 non-poisonous. If you let others choose, the poisonous one is the poison and the non-poisonous one is the antidote. You only need to drink both and you'll be fine, right? Zhang Xiaohu was stunned. He smiled bitterly. Disciple doesn't dare. This thought only flashed through my mind. Even if that wasn't the case, disciple would still drink on behalf of the 2 of them. You think I'm talking about the play you're talking about? Nun Jing-yi sneered. This wine cup is indeed highly poisonous. That cup is clear water. It has nothing to do with the antidote. Cult leader, quickly, can you give me the antidote? Nun Chang'e asked. Chang'e, do you think I'm easy to talk to? Nun Jing-yi sneered. My words are the law. How can I change them? I've already listened to Peacock and Chen Chen's opinions and let them go for now. However, Zhang Xiaohu has made his own choice. You and I have no right to interfere. This, Chang'e was speechless. She blamed herself for not drinking it earlier. However, Nun Jingyi continued. This poison is slow-acting. It will only act up at this time every year. Moreover, if you don't take the antidote before this time every year, the poison will become more and more intense. In the end, the poison will enter the bone marrow, and there will be no cure. Oh, right, I forgot. If you don't take the antidote, the pain will increase by 3 times every year when it acts up. And this antidote is only in my hands. Zhang Xiaohu smiled bitterly. It seemed that everything was within Nun Jingyi's calculations. Of course, as long as you listen to me obediently and help your Misty school, I'll send you the antidote every year. There's no difference whether you take it or not. This disciple obeys. Zhang Xiaohu answered weakly. All right, you can go back now. Although Gao Kunheng and Ming Qing are helping you to take care of the Misty school, you still have to show your face. I'll send out the law immediately. Yes, cult leader. Zhang Xiaohu hesitated. He looked at Yin and asked again, I wonder if Miss O. She will return to the Misty Villa? Yin will naturally return to the Huanqi Villa. If she doesn't, how can the Misty School be established? Also, those disciples of Shixin Peak, who have already lost their martial arts, they're useless to you. Let them stay. All right, this disciple understands. Zhang Xiaohu nodded, then said casually, however, they're loyal disciples of the Misty School. Although they've lost their martial arts, they've been treating this disciple very well recently. If I have their support, even if the other Misty School disciples refuse to accept it, or if Grandmaster Hu makes trouble, will it be of help? Yes, you don't have to worry about Hu Yunyi's side. They're not strong enough and won't make any big waves. If they also return to the Misty School and listen obediently, it'll be fine. Otherwise, Ming Qing will kill them all. Cult leader, you're wise, but this disciple still thinks it's better to appease them. Zhang Xiaohu smiled. Yes, I understand. Since you're now the leader of the Misty School, I'll naturally listen to your opinion. We'll do as you say. Quickly send someone to inform them that they've lost all their martial arts. I'm afraid they won't be able to keep up with you. Take the young Misty School disciples and go ahead first. They'll slowly follow behind. Zhang Xiaohu was overjoyed. Thank you for your arrangement, cult leader. After that, the people of the Misty School, along with young Ruping, left. Emotian's palace was silent. After a while, Peacock whispered, Cult leader, why? Nun Jingyi waved her hand and sighed. Actually, this cult has 2 plans. One is that Zhang Xiaohu chose Yin as his wife. This means that Zhang Xiaohu is a person who seeks benefits and avoids harm. He's a ruthless person, which is exactly what this cult wants. The other plan, which is also what this cult doesn't want to see, is Zhang Xiaohu's choice. He's a man who prioritizes love. This is also the person that this cult respects the most. It'll inevitably make things difficult for this cult. So we took advantage of Peacock's persuasion to let him take the poison. It's not that this cult is cruel, but this kind of person is really hard to control. Sigh, as long as Zhang Xiaohu doesn't make any big mistakes, this cult will definitely give him the antidote every year. You don't have to doubt this. That poison, is it really as you say? Qin Shun asked curiously. Of course. Nun Jingyi smiled. If we didn't have this assurance, would this cult let him go so easily? Yes, this disciple agrees with the cult leader's decision, Yuyin said. Seeing Chang'e's sadness, this disciple is also sad. I don't want them to be separated. Yes, since ancient times, it's been difficult for lovers to get married. This is why our cult respects lovers the most. This palace on Lingxiang Peak is called Emotian's Palace. Emotian City is also called Emotian City. But in life, who doesn't frown and worry? Io, sect leader, Qin Shun suddenly cried out. Just now, you reminded that Zhang Xiaohu not to break the second rule, but if he doesn't break the second rule, doesn't that mean he will break the first rule of the fragrant cult? Aren't you forcing him to make a mistake? Hee, Nun Jingyi said mysteriously. There are no assumptions. This cult only believes in the truth. In fact, Zhang Xiaohu has already made the best choice, and Chang'e and Oyen have also made the best choice. But this choice is right now, but who can guarantee the future? Nun Jingyi looked at the sky outside the palace and murmured, "If the heavens have feelings, the heavens will also grow old, let alone people?" -4. Chapter 1005. On Horned Dragon Mountain, the man dressed in martial arts attire had captured the little sword-wielding child. Just as he was about to use the child to threaten Chu Zhigao, he saw a yellow shadow suddenly leap out from one of the horse carriages. Before the man could see clearly, a chi-chi sound was heard as the shadow grabbed the man's face. With a shriek of "Io!" the man's face was immediately scratched open, leaving behind a few bloody scars. The yellow shadow did not stop. With a stomp on the man's chest, it turned around and once again landed on the horse carriage. Looking at the scratching appearance, wasn't that Chu Zhigao's little monkey? Other than the man who was caught, everyone else was stunned at first. Then, they started laughing as if they had seen the funniest thing in the world. When the monkey heard people laughing, it immediately became happy. It raised its red butt up high and shook it at everyone. The man was originally red in the face. Now that he was being mocked by everyone and teased by the monkey, he became anxious. Looking at the child in his hand, he waved his hand and slapped the child's face. With a "pa" sound, the child immediately wailed and spat out a few teeth from his mouth. Blood flowed out and the side of his face that was hit slowly swelled up. "You?" Chu Zhigao saw this and was furious. He roared, "You little brat! You! What kind of man are you? How dare you make things difficult for a child?" When the man heard this, his face became ferocious. He grabbed the child's neck with one hand and raised it up high. He said fiercely, "I don't know how many of these little bastards I have killed. Chu Zhigao, I will let you see the consequences of not agreeing to my parting mountain manner." "Jing," an old voice sounded from another carriage. Then, the curtain of the carriage was lifted and a white-haired old woman crawled out of the carriage. She raised her hand and shouted, "Zhigao, can you bear to see your own son being killed by others?" Then, no matter how important the bone-solidifying pill's formula is, could it be more important than Jing's life? "Mother," Chu Zhigao dropped to his knees and said, "Mother doesn't know. If your son takes out this pill formula, I'm afraid that Jing will die even faster." Sigh, Chu Zhigao's mother sighed, "Mother, how could I not know? It was just that, at this juncture, how could Mother bear to part with Jing? This pill formula is also a scourge if we keep it. Back then, it took your father's life. Now, it has brought disaster to us. Why don't we throw it to them now and exchange it for our survival?" When Chu Zhigao heard that, he nodded and said, "Anyway, this Dragon Mountain is Mother's, and this pill formula is also Mother's. If Mother insists on throwing it away, then that boy has nothing to say. It's just that. I'm afraid that if the boy gives it to them, they will immediately turn hostile and we—" At this time, the manor master of the Parting Pine Manor immediately shouted, "Chu Zhigao, I am only interested in your pill formula. As for your lives, I don't care at all. As long as you hand over the pill formula, I will immediately open a path for you to leave the mountain. Promise that you won't chase us down the mountain? Promise that you won't look for us in the future. Promise." Chu Zhigao talked for a long time and asked all kinds of questions. In the end, he sighed and took out a crumpled piece of paper from behind his feet. He said, "Manor Master Lu, you have to keep your word. Otherwise, Chu will destroy the pill formula and everyone will go their separate ways." Manor Master Lu's eyes lit up. He patted his chest and said, "I've already said what I wanted to say. What else do you not believe?" Chu Zhigao looked at his mother with a face full of helplessness. He then looked at Jing, whose face had turned green. He sighed and handed the pill formula over. Manor Master Lu took the pill formula and looked at it carefully. He then carefully put it in his pocket and said with a smile, "Chu Zhigao, look at you. I originally wanted to discuss this with you, but you refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. You caused such a huge crack in the friendship between us brothers. Sigh. If I let you go, wouldn't I have left behind a problem for myself? If you casually spread the news that the pill formula for the bone condensation pill is in the parting pine manor, how could I accept it? You. Chu Zhigao was extremely angry. Just now. Manor Master Lu laughed and said, just take it that I was farting. Chu Zhigao turned around and looked at his mother, who was also filled with regret. He couldn't help but feel disheartened. Kill him. Manor Master Lu ordered expressionlessly. The man who was holding Jing in his hand sneered and was about to use all his strength, but at that moment, he felt a chill in his chest and a wave of pain came from his back. The strength in his body was immediately sucked away. Not to mention lifting the child. His body had already collapsed to the ground. The man let go and Jing fell to the ground. Both of his legs touched the ground, and he immediately fell to the ground, gasping for breath. It was as if even crying had become an extravagant wish. Everyone was shocked by the sudden change, and they all looked on in astonishment. They saw that behind the man, a woman in purple was slowly pulling out a long sword from the man's back. Although her hands were trembling, and her lips were trembling, her eyes were resolute, and her movements were skillful. Behind the woman was a young man with a sword embryo in his hand. His eyes were filled with anger, and he frowned slightly as he looked at the woman's long sword. You. Who are you? How dare you spoil the business of my Jingle Villa? Manor Master Lu was furious and shouted, Xiao Hua, hurry up and do it. Don't let me see these despicable people again. The woman was Ming. At that moment, she said with a trembling voice, as if she was extremely agitated. Not far away, Chu Zhigao and Jing's grandmother had completely different reactions. Chu Zhigao saw that the man from Jingle Villa was killed and his son Jing fell to the ground. He rushed over recklessly to check on his son's condition. Jing's grandmother first focused her attention on Jing like Chu Zhigao. But when she saw Ming's face, she unconsciously revealed a look of extreme fear. Her whole body trembled as she looked at Ming in horror, forgetting everything around her. After receiving Ming's order, Zhang Xiaohua unfurrowed her brows and said, Don't worry, I am very good at dealing with the trash in Jianghu. I will soon return Jianghu to its former glory. As she spoke, she swung Pan Ri and directly pounced on Manor Master Lu. Manor Master Lu was shocked, but he did not have the strength to fight back. He quickly raised his long sword to meet the attack. But how could he be a match for Zhang Xiaohua's heaven-shaking stick and move? When Zhang Xiaohua swung Pan Ri, Manor Master Lu had no choice but to raise his sword to meet the attack. Even Hu Bin of Ruijian Palace could not completely block this move, let alone the Manor Master of Jingle Villa. Poof! With a muffled sound, Pan Ruo smashed Manor Lord Lu's longsword and his chest. A large part of his chest caved in. He spat out a mouthful of dirty blood and fell to the ground. It looked like he was going to spasm for a while before he stopped breathing. When the remaining people saw this, they immediately scattered like birds and beasts. But in the wilderness, there was no one to be seen. It was also very easy to catch up with them. They were the ones who chose to deal with Chu Zhigao, but now, it became their burial ground. In just half a cup of tea's time, they all died an unnatural death. Chu Zhigao, who was holding Jing in his arms, saw that the manor master of Jingle Villa was killed by Zhang Xiaohua. He was overjoyed. He carried Jing to his mother and did not notice his mother's strange expression. He quickly ran to Zhang Xiaohua and cupped his hands. I am Chu Zhigao from Dragon Mountain. Thank you for saving my life, Xiaoxia. How should I address you, Xiaoxia? Hee. Zhang Xiaohua laughed in her heart. This Xiaoxia already knew that you were Chu Zhigao. Otherwise, however, Zhang Xiaohua also cupped her hands and said, I am Ren Xiaoyao, a disciple of the Fragrant Cult's protector. Fragrant Cult? Chu Zhigao was shocked and said with respect, So you are a disciple of a famous sect. You are really worthy of my respect. No need. This is Senior Sister Bai's order. If you want to thank someone, you should thank her. When Chu Zhigao heard this, he ran over and thanked Ming. Ming seemed to have not recovered from the discomfort of killing the man of Jingle Villa. She waved her hand impatiently. Chu Zhigao was helpless. He ran to Zhang Xiaohua and said with a smile, I am really lucky to meet a disciple of the Fragrant Cult in this remote village. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and waved her hand. Your luck has always been good. Chu Zhigao did not understand what Zhang Xiaohua was referring to. He also smiled. After a while, Chu Zhigao seemed to have thought of something. He took out the bone-solidifying pill formula from the body of Jingle Villa's Villa Master Lu. He handed it to Zhang Xiaohua with both hands and said, Ren Xiaoxia, this is a secret pill formula of my Dragon Mountain. The pills concocted with this formula have a miraculous effect on injuries. If Xiaoxia does not mind, you can take it. Consider it as Chu's repayment for saving Xiaoxia's life. Hee, if I take it away, how will you survive? Zhang Xiaohua laughed. No matter, Chu has already memorized this formula. He can write it down with his eyes closed. Xiaoxia, don't decline. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and put the formula away. She then took out a jade bottle from her chest and said, I can't take it for free. This is a pill concocted by me. It has a miraculous effect on cultivating internal strength. If you take it while you are meditating, it will be very beneficial to you. The bone-solidifying pill formula that Chu Zhigao had given to Zhang Xiaohua earlier was used to concoct the bone-solidifying pill. She had saved many people in the Misty School. Now that she was returning the meridian-soothing pill, it could be considered as ending the cause of Chu Zhigao giving her the formula. Chu Zhigao knew the miraculous effects of the incense sex pills. He carefully accepted it. Zhang Xiaohua asked, Brother Chu, where are you planning to go? Chu Zhigao was overwhelmed by the unexpected favor. He waved his hands and said, Xiaoxia, don't call me brother. I can't stand it. I'll just call you. He thought for a while but still couldn't find a suitable name. Forget it. We just met by chance. What's the harm in calling you Brother Chu? Zhang Xiaohua remembered Chu Zhigao's kindness in giving her the formula and said respectfully, Then, I'm really sorry. Chu Zhigao scratched his head and said, Sigh. This Dragon Mountain is where my mother grew up. 40 years ago, Chu Zhigao said and looked at his mother. However, Chu Zhigao's mother was hugging Jing with one hand. Her eyes were fixed on the dream and didn't even blink. Please vote for me. Please vote for me. Please keep it. Please tip me. Thank you. -4. Chapter 1006. Mother. When Chu Zhigao saw his mother's infatuated look, he thought that she was frightened by what had just happened. He did not bother to explain anything to Zhang Xiaohua and immediately left Zhang Xiaohua behind and ran over. When Zhang Xiaohua saw Chu Zhigao running away, she could not bear it. After all, this old woman was old and had been tormented by the people of Jingli Mountain Manor for a while. No one would be able to stand it. Hence, she followed along to see if there was anything she could help with. However, when he saw Jing's grandmother staring at the dream, his heart skipped a beat. At this moment, Chu Zhigao also ran to his mother and reached out to support her. He said anxiously, Mother, what happened to you? Don't scare me. Those bad people from Jingli Mountain Manor have been killed by Ren Xiaoxia. There's no one else. Before he could say anything, Chu Zhigao's grandmother turned her head and saw Chu Zhigao. She immediately shouted, Boy's father, why did you run back? Didn't we agree to meet at Dragon Mountain? Aren't you walking right into a trap? Then, Jing's grandmother grabbed Chu Zhigao and jumped down from the carriage. With a plop, she knelt in front of the dream and kowtowed. She begged, Sacred Ambassador, please spare our lives. Sacred Ambassador, please spare our lives. We are all cowards. Since we have already agreed to submit to the divine sect, how could we go back on our words? As she spoke, she grabbed Chu Zhigao and begged, Boy's father, you should also quickly beg the Sacred Ambassador. Although you are a disciple of the Dalan Temple, but after all, it is only in name. The Dalan Temple does not teach any martial arts. You don't put the Dalan Temple first. Chu Zhigao was pulled by his mother. He seemed to know that his mother had misunderstood something, but he did not dare to struggle. Thinking that Meng had also helped him, he kowtowed and said, Thank you for saving my life. Hearing Jing's grandmother's crazy words and seeing the two kneeling and kowtowing, Meng was already flustered. She moved away in a panic and shouted, Old lady, I am not the Sacred Ambassador. You should quickly get up. Jing's grandmother did not believe her and knocked her forehead until it was bleeding. At this time, Jing seemed to have woken up and started crying. Jing's grandmother became even more flustered and shouted, "Sacred Ambassador, this is my son. I just named him Zhigao. Sacred Ambassador, please be merciful and take our lives. Let my son live. He is just a child. He doesn't know anything. You can take him away and do whatever you want to him." Meng's face was filled with panic, and she could only wave her hands. Chu Zhigao. Tears fell from his eyes. He seemed to have thought of something. With a sigh, Zhang Xiaohua flashed behind Jing's grandmother and pointed at Jing's grandmother. Grandma Jing closed her mouth and collapsed on the ground. "Brother Chu, I only hit her sleeping acupoint. After sleeping for a night, she might wake up tomorrow," Zhang Xiaohua explained. "Thank you, Ren Xiaoxia." Chu Zhigao's expression was gloomy. The yellow little monkey had just grabbed someone and was playing around in the carriage. At this time, it jumped again and jumped onto Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder. Chu Zhigao was shocked and was about to scold it, but the monkey seemed to be familiar with Zhang Xiaohua. It reached out and grabbed Zhang Xiaohua's hair and ruffled it, making it a mess. Chu Zhigao was embarrassed and scolded. "Come here." The monkey was very obedient and jumped onto Chu Zhigao's shoulder. "Ren Xiaoxia, don't blame it. This animal is too naughty," Chu Zhigao said apologetically. It's okay. Let's quickly settle your mother down." Then, he looked at Jing, who was lying on the ground and crying. He looked at the mountain path and said, "The child is also frightened and needs to rest. You see, going down the mountain, I'm afraid it's not appropriate." Chu Zhigao sighed and carried his mother to the carriage. Zhang Xiaohua went over and picked up Jing. She wanted to coax him but didn't know how. Chu Zhigao helped his mother settle down and took Jing. He patted him on the back and hummed a few unknown songs. The child slowly stopped crying, and after a while, he gradually fell asleep. After putting Jing in the carriage, Chu Zhigao smiled bitterly and said, "I've embarrassed myself in front of Ren Xiaoxia and the young lady. This is what it's like to have a family to feed." At this time, Meng also realized that Jing's grandmother had misunderstood. She must have thought that she was someone who looked like her 40 years ago. That person might be her mother. Therefore, she walked over. Hearing Chu Zhigao's words, she shook her head and said, "Hero Chu, this is the joy of a family. Many people can't even ask for it." "Perhaps." Chu Zhigao looked at the two people in the carriage with a gratified expression. He then looked at the sky and said, "Chu's little nest in Dragon Mountain has been burned down by the people of Parting Mountain Villa. However, there is still a place where Chu usually hunts. There are also some places where it's already late. Xiaoxia and the young lady, why don't you come with me and stay for the night? That would be considered my hospitality as a host." Zhang Xiaohua heard this and was overjoyed. She had something to ask, so how could she leave? She cupped her hands and said, "Thank you, Brother Chu." Chu Zhigao drove a carriage, and so did Zhang Xiaohua. Meng sat behind Zhang Xiaohua and looked at the sunset of Tsang Mountain. She whispered, "Xiaohua, do you think that person is my mother?" "Well, most likely. She looks exactly like you. 40 years ago, she should be about the same age. When the old lady wakes up tomorrow, we can ask her. Even if there is a blood feud, it has been decades. You didn't exist at that time, so it has nothing to do with you. Moreover, we just saved their family of 3. We can ask some things, right?" "Alas, I hope so." Meng looked at Zhang Xiaohua's back and said in a low voice, "Sacred Ambassador, this Sacred Ambassador. Which Sacred Ambassador is she from?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at Meng's dispirited expression and said, "You don't have to think too much. Just ask her tomorrow." After a while, the sky turned dark. Chu Zhigao, who was in front, was still rushing. He said, "Meng, do you want to rest? My driving skills are very good. The carriage doesn't shake at all." "Really?" Meng acted as if she didn't hear him and muttered, "Sacred Ambassador." Zhang Xiaohua sighed. Zhuanxiang sect doesn't have a sacred ambassador. Misty School doesn't have a sacred ambassador. Dalan Temple also doesn't have a sacred ambassador. Among the big sects, only the Righteous Alliance and the Tenryu sect have a sacred ambassador. If it were the other small sects, we wouldn't know. You don't have to think too much. Ming shook her head. How can I not think too much? She then thought of something and asked, How can you be so sure that Misty School doesn't have a sacred ambassador? If my mother is the sacred ambassador of Misty School, I should go to Serene Peak. Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly. I stayed at Serene Peak before. I know that they don't have a sacred ambassador. Oh. Meng nodded. I forgot. Chu Zhigao said that the place was very far away. When they arrived, the sky was already dark. At this time, the places where he usually hunted were just a few small caves. There were ready-made straws in the caves that were spread on the ground. Chu Zhigao then lit 2 bonfires, and the cave immediately warmed up. After settling his mother and child down, Chu Zhigao took out some dry food and roasted it over the bonfire. The monkey was not afraid of fire and kept jumping around the 3 of them. It seemed very happy. Ren Xiaoxia, as far as I know, your fragrant cult, female disciples shouldn't appear in Jianghu now. I don't know. Chu Zhigao said tactfully. Haha, Brother Chu knows that our fragrant cult is now open. In the future, our disciples will be the same as the disciples of other sections. They can freely roam Jianghu. Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile. My senior sister and I came out this time to deliver the news to the Dalan Temple and invite the Dalan Temple's immortal master to come to our fragrant cult to participate in the martial arts convention. Martial arts convention? Chu Zhigao's face showed admiration. It's a pity that my martial arts are low. Even if I want to go to the convention, I can't. Then, he suddenly realized and asked curiously, Dalan Temple? Why did you 2 come to Dragon Mountain from Great Forest? This place is not close to the Dalan Temple and it's not on the way. Haha, Zhang Xiaohua said secretly, that's what I wanted you to ask. Sigh, isn't it because of my senior sister? Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, looking at Brother Chu, although it's a little difficult, the 3 of them can live together and share weal and woe. It's the true meaning of life. But how many people in this world are as lucky as Brother Chu? My senior sister looks at Brother Chu with envy. As he spoke, he roughly recounted what had happened in his dream. There's such a thing? When Chu Zhigao heard this, he looked at Dream, who was beside him with a sad face and was very sympathetic. He cupped his hands and said, Miss, looking at my mother today, she seems to know something. When we see her condition tomorrow, we can ask her in detail. How about it? Ren Xiaoxia's words make sense. Even if something happened 40 years ago, I'm still a child and don't know. Sigh, even if there's a great hatred between the 2 of you, since you've saved us today, we don't owe each other anything. Brother Chu, if such a thing really happened, I apologize on behalf of my mother. If there's anything you want to compensate, Brother Chu, please tell me. Chu Zhigao shook his head and said no more. Xiao Yao, I'm going to sleep first. Dream saw this and forced a smile. All right. Zhang Xiaohua brought Dream to the cave next door and settled everything. Dream lay on the straw and fell asleep not long after. Zhang Xiaohua held Dream's hand and looked at Dream's haggard face with heartache. She sighed and used the jade talisman to protect Dream. Then, she walked out of the cave. Outside the cave, the full moon had just risen. Chu Zhigao stood in front of the cave and looked up at the full moon, as if he was thinking about something. The monkey also learned to stand. When it heard Zhang Xiaohua coming over, it hurriedly jumped onto Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder. -4. Chapter 1007. Seeing the monkey jump onto Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder again, Chu Zhigao felt very helpless. He apologized. Ren Xiaoxia, please don't blame him. Although this monkey accompanied me in the Jianghu and did some shady business as a performer, but he was rarely as close to people as he is today. I've never thought that this monkey would actually hit it off with you. Young hero. He's so affectionate towards you when they just met. Presumably, he's also grateful to you for saving his life. Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. When she saved Chu Zhigao that year, she covered her face. Chu Zhigao naturally wouldn't know that she was the one who saved him. This monkey must have smelled her scent and recognized her. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, being close to each other is one thing, but it doesn't mean that it's the first time we met. Ren Xiaoxia, what do you mean? Chu Zhigao was obviously stunned. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and took out the book that Chu Zhigao gave her. Under Chu Zhigao's puzzled gaze, she handed it over. Chu Zhigao took it and looked at it carefully under the bright moonlight. He didn't need to open the book. He only needed to see the familiar cover. Chu Zhigao immediately understood. Benefactor? As he spoke, he knelt down with a plop sound. Don't. Zhang Xiaohua reacted quickly and pulled him back. She smiled and said, Brother Chu, you don't have to be like this. I just happened to meet you that year and helped you. But Chu Zhigao struggled a few times, but Zhang Xiaohua's hands were like cast iron. He couldn't move at all. He could only apologize, but that day was also very dangerous. If it wasn't for Xiaoxia, I might have lost my life that day. Zhang Xiaohua pulled Chu Zhigao up and said, in broad daylight on the streets of Lu Town, how would they dare? Sigh, Xiaoxia is too kind. The evil tiger gang has done many things like robbing and killing. Evil tiger gang? I've heard that they have some power in Lu Town, but I've never had any dealings with them. Xiaoxia saved me. When I went to the side, I only found out after asking around. I was scared. The evil tiger gang probably didn't put me in their eyes and didn't know the power of the bone-solidifying pill. But when I met that scoundrel young master, I couldn't do anything. Oh, that's right. Give this pill recipe back to Xiaoxia. This thing might be useful to Xiaoxia in the future. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and waved her hand. This pill recipe? I've already seen it. Oh? Chu Zhigao was obviously disappointed. Xiaoxia, take it first. You don't understand it now, but maybe you'll understand it in the future? Hee. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and took out a jade bottle from her bosom. What is this? Chu Zhigao stared blankly. When he opened the bottle and smelled the faint medicinal fragrance, he couldn't help but stare blankly. Bone-solidifying pill? Immediately, with trembling hands, he poured out a pill into his hands. Looking at the color of the pill, he brought it to his nose and smelled the scent of the pill. His face revealed an expression of wild joy. It really is a bone-solidifying pill. It really is a bone-solidifying pill. I actually saw a real bone-solidifying pill. But immediately, Chu Zhigao had some doubts and asked, Ren Xiaoxia, this is a bone-solidifying pill refined according to my pill recipe? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and said, yes, but why is the medicinal smell of this bone-solidifying pill so faint? In my family's pill recipe, there are records of medicinal fragrances that assail the nose. I don't know. Zhang Xiaohua touched her nose and said, but this thing is indeed refined according to Brother Chu's pill recipe. There's no mistake about it. Hee, that's good, Chu Zhigao said and put the pill into the jade bottle and passed it to Zhang Xiaohua. He asked again, then what about the other pill recipes? I wonder if Xiaoxia has refined them? Zhang Xiaohua saw him return the jade bottle to her and was slightly stunned. This is for you. Why are you returning it to me? For me? Chu Zhigao couldn't believe his ears and said, This bone-solidifying pill is a miraculous pill. Even my ancestors were unable to refine it successfully. Ren Xiaoxia actually gave it to me? Saying this, he shook the jade bottle and said with a smile, If Xiaoxia has the heart, just give me one pill. Zhang Xiaohua was sweating profusely. She reached out and took out another bottle from her bosom and said, I have more here. Take that. You have more? Chu Zhigao was shocked. He wanted to verify, but he didn't dare to take Zhang Xiaohua's jade bottle. Zhang Xiaohua patted his shoulder and put away the jade bottle, saying, Don't be shocked. This bone-solidifying pill also has a pill recipe in my fragrant religion. Usually, a few disciples with high status can get some. Although I don't have it now, I think I will in the future. So, this bottle of bone-solidifying pills, you should accept it. Chu Zhigao couldn't tell if Zhang Xiaohua was telling the truth or not, but thinking that she had given him such a precious pill, he was already moved to tears. After he carefully accepted the jade bottle, he said mysteriously, Ren Xiaoxia's righteousness really makes me blush with shame. Oh right, Xiaoxia, do you still remember when I told Xiaoxia that my dragon mountain had a strange place? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, I remember. Brother Chu also said that if there was a chance to come to Dragon Mountain, he would let me try my luck. Haha, that's right. Chu Zhigao nodded. At that time, I was hoping that Xiaoxia would come, but Lu Town is really too far away. If there wasn't a special reason, who would come here? However, since Xiaoxia came, then Chu can't be a person who doesn't keep his word. That strange place isn't too far from here. Xiaoxia and Chu coming here might really be fate. That's good. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I love those strange things the most. Well then, Chu Zhigao was just about to move, but looking at the bonfire in the cave, he hesitated and said, It's already late. Why don't Chu bring Xiaoxia over tomorrow? It's okay, Brother Chu. Tell me the place and I'll go there myself. You just stay here and guard it. Well, that's good too. Chu remembers that Xiaoxia's qinggong is very good. Xiaoxia can go to that place if he wants. As he said that, he told her the location of that place. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and her heart jumped. This place seems very familiar. Zhang Xiaohua greeted Chu Zhigao and flew towards the mountain valley. When she could no longer see, she used her flying technique and arrived at the cliff in a short while. The cliff was very clear under the moonlight, smooth and straight. A deafening sound of water came from below. Zhang Xiaohua flew down the cliff without hesitation. She followed the vines hanging from the cliff and came to the side of a waterfall. She saw that the waterfall was very strange. It surged out from a 10 feet wide crack in the rocks and hung at the bottom of the cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, she could faintly see a pitch-black, deep pool. The deafening sound of water was really the sound of the waterfall falling into the deep pool. When Zhang Xiaohua was halfway down the waterfall, the surging water created a small mist which covered the entire waterfall. Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to scan the area and a strange smile appeared on her face. She waited for him to descend further before she rushed into the waterfall. When she came into contact with the waterfall, she immediately disappeared. The cliff was actually empty. On the cliff, under the waterfall, there was a 10 feet wide hole. Zhang Xiaohua stood in the hole and looked into the darkness. She laughed. Jinren Hualong, the Feilu mountain range that you mentioned is now gone. There is only this Horn Dragon Mountain. If not for this strange waterfall and the cave within the waterfall, I wouldn't be able to confirm that this is the place of inheritance that you mentioned in the Jade Slip. Jinren Hualong, now that the immortal Tao has been destroyed for a long time, the heaven and earth Yuan Qi is recovering. This is also an opportunity for the immortal Tao to flourish. I am not talented, but I shall go in and take a look to see if your immortal Tao is still around. If it is, then I shall not stand on ceremony and keep it. Since you are a rogue cultivator and do not belong to any sect, I shall pass down this immortal Tao to you and call it Beidou School. As Zhang Xiaohua thought about it, he laughed loudly and walked into the cave. With a luminous pearl in her hand, Zhang Xiaohua walked for half a cup of tea's time and came to a dry place. There were no longer any mountain paths here, and there were only empty walls. Zhang Xiaohua walked to a place facing the west. She stretched out her hand and touched the wall but couldn't find anything. She then closed her eyes and formed a spell with her hands. Every time she formed a spell, the stone wall would vibrate slightly. After a dozen spells were formed, the stone wall suddenly emitted a faint red glow, and a cave half the height of a human appeared in front of Zhang Xiaohua. Kiki, this must be Jinren Hualong's cave. Zhang Xiaohua nodded her head. This set of spells was obtained by Zhang Xiaohua from Jinren Hualong's Jade Slip, and she was already familiar with it. Zhang Xiaohua stooped down and squeezed into the cave. Then, he walked around for a while. Along the way, he encountered a few more restrictive spells, but they were all easily broken by Zhang Xiaohua. Finally, he arrived at a cave that was about 100 feet tall and 300 feet wide. It looked very simple. Zhang Xiaohua then took out a few luminous pearls and placed them around the cave to illuminate it. When he saw it clearly, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He had been to the Incense Religion's Jade Hall and Mo Xiangong's Grand Hall. He had also been to Wan Wuxin's Sumeru World and the Dalan Temple's main hall. He thought that even if Jinren Hualong's cave was not as good as those places, it wouldn't be too far off. However, the cave in front of him was dry, and there was a faint ripple of spell which was very weak. How is this the demeanor of an immortal Tao senior? It's almost like my Guozhuang house. If Beidou School is like this, Kiki, wouldn't they be laughed at? Zhang Xiaohua curled her lips and said, following which, she looked at the layout of the cave carefully. She saw that there was a painting hanging on the stone wall in front of the cave. However, the painting had faded and she couldn't see what was on it. Below the painting was a praying mat. When she used her divine sense to scan the painting, she couldn't see anything special. On the left side of the cave, there was a row of shelves with some jade bottles on it. However, there weren't many of them and it seemed very empty. Please vote for me. Please vote for me. Please keep it. Please tip me. Thank you. -4. Chapter 1008. On the right side of the cave, there was a row of bookshelves filled with books. The bookshelf on the left looked empty, but upon closer inspection, it was not filled with books but jade bamboo slips. Needless to say, Zhang Xiaohua took a big step forward and jumped to the front of the bookshelf where the jade bamboo slips were placed. She stretched out her hand to grab the jade bamboo slips, but just as she touched the bookshelf, a gentle force blocked her way. "Io, look at me. I am so anxious." Zhang Xiaohua laughed secretly and released her divine sense. After looking at it for a while, her right hand agilely struck out a series of spells as though she was playing a zither. This spell was more complicated, and the more she struck, the slower her speed became. Zhang Xiaohua's expression became more serious, and at the end, her forehead was covered with sweat. After all, this was Venerable Fiery Dragon's importation of celestial Tao, and the jade bamboo slips must have recorded Venerable Fiery Dragon's cultivation methods. Although it was not as precious as the ones that Zhang Xiaohua had obtained on the deserted island, these were the foundations of celestial Tao cultivation. As long as she had these foundational cultivation methods, in addition to the recovery of the heaven and earth's elemental energy, Zhang Xiaohua was confident that she could establish the Beidou school by herself. Thinking back to the time when the Righteous Alliance roped in the Long family, why? Wasn't it because they wanted to obtain some celestial Tao relics from the Long family? What kind of benefits could they obtain from it to find the path to celestial Tao? Now that this broad future was in front of Zhang Xiaohua's eyes, how could Zhang Xiaohua not work hard? At the end, Zhang Xiaohua's forehead was dripping with beads of sweat, and her face was pale. She gritted her teeth and shouted, "Open!" His right hand seemed to be holding something heavier than 10,000 caddies, and he slowly pushed it to the front of the bookshelf. Kacha! A crisp sound rang out, as if something had broken. A faint red light flashed on the bookshelf, and everything returned to normal. Zhang Xiaohua wiped off his sweat. He did not sit down to adjust his breathing and recover his true energy. Instead, with a greedy look on his face, he waved his hand and the entire bookshelf flew into his belt. Then, he walked to a few bookshelves at the side and casually picked up a book. When he opened it, he could not help but be overjoyed. He saw that the book recorded several thousand years of travel. Needless to say, these bookshelves were all books that recorded the local customs, culture, and geography of the past. With a wave of his hand, Zhang Xiaohua collected all the bookshelves into his belt. I wonder if there are any secret martial arts manuals in these books? Zhang Xiaohua thought to himself. He then walked to the bookshelf on the left. There was a hole at the side of the bookshelf, and it was pitch black inside. Just as Zhang Xiaohua had expected, this bookshelf was used to store pills. There were a few jade bottles that had their own seals on them. After Zhang Xiaohua rested for a while, he took out a primordial stone to replenish his true energy and broke the seals easily. He then saw that the jade bottles had the words, Peiyuan Pill, written on them. Peiyuan Pill? What is this? Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. I don't think there was any mention of this in the jade slip of Venerable Fiery Dragon, but I think I've heard of it somewhere before. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the seals on the jade bottles that were about to collapse. She then recited the seals to prevent the true energy of the pills from dissipating. She then kept the pills in her pouch. She then turned around to look at the empty cave. It was originally empty. After that, Zhang Xiaohua took the luminous pearl and entered the cave beside the bookshelf. The cave was not long, and it only took a few steps to reach the end. Looking at the furnishings, she knew that this was Venerable Fiery Dragon's alchemy room. There was a praying mat, a medium-sized alchemy furnace, and an earth fire. However, the earth fire had already cooled down. Zhang Xiaohua recited the seals, but there was no fire coming out. It seemed that the earth fire had already changed its path after 10,000 years. Although Zhang Xiaohua already had 18 trigrams purple gold alchemy furnace in her belt, Zhang Xiaohua still kept the alchemy furnace. She then used her divine sense to check, but there was nothing else. The Peiyuan pill was obviously made by Elder Hua. Why is there no record of the pill formula in the alchemy room? Zhang Xiaohua then laughed to herself. I'm really a miser. Elder Hua said very clearly that he placed all the orthodoxies together and left them for the faded ones. There are so many jade slips on the bookshelf. There must be a record in one of them. When I get out, I'll look for it carefully. Looking at the empty cave, Zhang Xiaohua sighed. This itinerant cultivator is really poor. Even if I wanted to pick up some trash, there's nothing left. Sigh. This bastard still doesn't know how to be content. He has already taken away all the orthodoxies. What else does he want? Zhang Xiaohua wanted to take the portrait away. However, the portrait was already blurred. She couldn't see venerable fiery dragon's face. Even if she took it away, it would be useless. Furthermore, didn't Zhang Xiaohua want to be the founder of the Beidou school? After leaving the cave, Zhang Xiaohua turned her head to look at the pitch-black cave. Her eyes rolled, and she cast a few spells to strengthen the restrictive spell in the cave. She then turned around, rushed out of the waterfall, and flew back. When she returned to the original cave, Chu Zhigao was already sitting crookedly by the bonfire and taking a nap. Zhang Xiaohua didn't hide her footsteps. When Zhang Xiaohua walked to Chu Zhigao's side, Chu Zhigao immediately woke up. When he saw that it was Zhang Xiaohua, he immediately asked in surprise, "How is it? Ren Xiaoxia, did you find anything?" Zhang Xiaohua didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Brother Chu, you in this Dragon Mountain, how should I describe it? Your family has been living in Dragon Mountain for generations?" No. Chu Zhigao didn't understand what Zhang Xiaohua meant. However, he still shook his head. This Dragon Mountain belongs to my mother's family. Chu's family was originally in Poyang Town. Poyang Town's Chu Sanfeng? Zhang Xiaohua blurted out. Chu Zhigao was stunned. He asked curiously, "How did Ren Xiaoxia know my father's name? He has passed away a long time ago." Poyang Town's Chu Sanfeng was the last name on the list given to Zhang Xiaohua by the Dalan Temple's great master Changgung. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua had some impression of him. When she heard that he was Chu Zhigao's father, she couldn't help but nod and ask, "Your father is also one of the people my senior sister and I are looking for?" Oh, Chu Zhigao suddenly understood. He nodded and said, That's right. Mother must know something about your senior sister." Then he said, "Ever since father passed away, the Chu family has been in decline, and our family's martial arts have not been mastered. Mother was the only one in my grandfather's family at Dragon Mountain, so she brought me to Dragon Mountain." Then, is this bone condensation pill from Dragon Mountain, or your Chu family? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly asked. "It's from Dragon Mountain." Chu Zhigao replied without hesitation, "My mother's family seems to be guarding something in Dragon Mountain. However, it has been a long time. In my mother's generation, she is the only one. As for me, I only have one son, Jing. I estimate that the secret of Dragon Mountain will be lost soon." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and asked again, "Brother Chu, you know how to refine pills?" "How could I?" Chu Zhigao's face was slightly red. "I just follow Dragon Mountain's pill recipe and brew some medicinal plasters myself. I can make a living in the Jianghu." Zhang Xiaohua muttered to herself for a moment. She took out a jade talisman and handed it to Chu Zhigao, saying, "Brother Chu, your bone condensation pill has been of great help to me. I have nothing to repay you with. Take this jade talisman. If anything strange happens, feel free to break it." "Oh, right." As she spoke, Zhang Xiaohua took out some banknotes and silver and handed it over, saying, "Take this silver. It's not of much use to me." Chu Zhigao was about to decline when Zhang Xiaohua continued, "Furthermore, in the future, I have any matters, I will have to trouble Brother Chu. If possible, I would like Brother Chu to come to my sect to refine pills and practice martial arts. This can also be considered as repayment for the time you have spent at Dragon Mountain." "Repayment for the time we have spent at Dragon Mountain?" Chu Zhigao didn't understand the meaning of this sentence at first, but when he came to his senses, he immediately exclaimed in surprise, Ren Shaoxia, could it be that there really are secret martial arts manuals in that place? But Chu has been there more than once. What? I didn't discover anything? Chu Zhigao still didn't quite believe it. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Why would little brother lie to you about such things? Don't tell me that this little brother will support your family of 3 for no reason? Ren Shaoxia, don't misunderstand. Chu just doesn't dare to believe it. That place is just an ordinary cave. Although Mother occasionally mentioned it, but Chu Zhigao stuttered a little. After a while, he sighed. I heard Mother say that fate is decided by the heavens and not by men. Perhaps this is what it means. My Dragon Mountain has been guarding this place for many generations, but we haven't been able to find it. Even I, Chu, have been there many times. I didn't expect that when I impulsively invited young Hero over in Lu Town, it would actually... He couldn't help but sigh. Ha ha ha. Zhang Xiaohua laughed. Brother Chu, you are thinking too much. Although Brother Chu may not be able to learn this secret martial arts manual, Jing is still young. What's the difference between Jing and your younger brother obtaining it? Ren Shaoxia? You mean you want to accept Jing into the cult of fragrance? Chu Zhigao was pleasantly surprised. Zhang Xiaohua shook his head. That's not it. I have other orthodoxies. However, this matter shouldn't be publicized. Once I have settled everything, I will come and find Brother Chu. Other orthodoxies? Chu Zhigao suddenly understood. He slapped his forehead and said, Chu understands. Chu is also willing to go. It's just alchemy and martial arts. It's better than being bullied in Dragon Mountain. Brother Chu, my sect is not the cult of fragrance. You should be clear about this, Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile. With a disciple like Ren Shaoxia, even if it's not a famous sect. So what? Chu Zhigao said. Besides, Chu is just a Jianghu performer. I'm grateful that your sect has not abandoned me. I'm already moved to tears. The two of them talked for a long time. Unknowingly, it was already midnight. Zhang Xiaohua returned to the cave and was still sleeping soundly. Zhang Xiaohua did not disturb her. He sat at the entrance of the cave and placed a restriction on it. He began to cultivate the Carefree Heart Sutra. -4. Chapter 1009. The next morning, Zhang Xiaohua woke up as soon as the sun rose. He removed the restriction at the entrance of the cave and around the dream before walking out of the cave. He had obtained many jade slips from the cave behind the waterfall, and they were all Taoist teachings of Venerable Fiery Dragon. Zhang Xiaohua was not in a hurry to count them as he had already kept them in his belt. He would look at them when he had the time. The morning of Horn Dragon Mountain was no different from the other mountain ranges. The crisp chirping of birds, the fresh air, and the occasional roar of unknown beasts could be heard. Unknown little wildflowers were blooming quietly, regardless of whether there was anyone around to admire them. The sparkling dew on the tall wild grass was glowing. Zhang Xiaohua stood in a spacious area and finished practicing the Fist of the North Star. He then picked up the Great Wisdom Sword and practiced the Tong Tian Staff technique that he had been pondering and comprehending for the past 10 days. The Sky-Piercing Staff technique was the same as the Big Dipper Fist technique. After Zhang Xiaohua's memory was erased, there were only 360 moves left. Over the past 10 days, Zhang Xiaohua had been trying to string these moves together. Perhaps it was because of Zhang Xiaohua's experience in practicing the Big Dipper Fist technique, but it wasn't too difficult to string these 360 moves together. However, he had been working hard and didn't have any extra time to practice. He closed his eyes and recalled the entire staff technique in his mind. Zhang Xiaohua picked up the long sword and prepared to practice the moves one by one. However, just as he was about to practice the first move, Zhang Xiaohua frowned. The moves of the Tong Tian staff technique were all staff moves, and most of them required 2 hands to hold the staff. His Great Wisdom Heavy Sword was a sword embryo, and only the sword hilt was comfortable to hold with one hand. The other places were wide and thick, and he couldn't hold it with one hand. Therefore, using this staff technique was rather awkward. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua braced himself and used his left hand to grab the sword embryo's heavy sword. He used Bo Ruo as a staff to dance, but after struggling to perform a few more moves, Zhang Xiaohua sighed and threw Bo Ruo to the ground. He thought to himself, it seems that this staff technique still needs to use a staff. That day, I thought wrong. I thought that if I could use the heaven-shocking staff Bo Ruo, then the staff technique should be able to be used as well. Sigh, what a pity. This Tong Tian staff technique seems to be extremely powerful. When Zhang Xiaohua's gaze landed on the small tree at the side, his eyes unconsciously lit up. He walked over and pulled out the small tree that was as thick as a duck egg. Using the short sword, he cut off the branches and used it as a staff to dance. After a few moves, Zhang Xiaohua shook his head again. This small tree is too light. It's as light as grass. When I dance it, there's no feeling at all. After that, Zhang Xiaohua found another one that was as thick as a bowl. Needless to say, it was much heavier than the previous one. However, this time, it was even more uncomfortable. Apart from the light weight, Zhang Xiaohua could not completely hold the small tree with one hand. Holding it was also uncomfortable. Sigh. Zhang Xiaohua only used a few moves before throwing the small tree to the ground again. He angrily said, "This is really uncomfortable. In the past, I had the Great Wisdom Sword but did not have a matching move. Now that I have a move, but do not have a matching weapon. What can I do? What can I do?" "Xiaohua, who are you angry with?" It was Meng's concerned voice that asked. Zhang Xiaohua raised her head. Meng was standing at the place where the sun shone. Her white skin was especially soft under the orange sunlight. Her pitch-black hair fluttered in the mountain wind, making her look like a flying fairy. Zhang Xiaohua felt a burst of sweetness in her heart. She smiled and said, "It's nothing. Didn't I see a set of staff techniques at the Dalan Temple a few days ago? I took it out today to try it out. Who knew that I did not have a suitable weapon? That staff technique was a waste of time." "Haha," Ming grinned and said, "As the saying goes, skills are not a burden. If you can learn a little more, then learn a little more. Weapons are a small matter. You will slowly come across them in the future. That staff technique is something from the Dalan Temple's Hidden Scriptures Pavilion. This is probably your only chance to enter it in your lifetime." Zhang Xiaohua spread out her hands and said, "You're right. I thought so too. But when I think of not being able to practice the staff technique, my heart always feels uncomfortable." "Well," Ming pursed her lips and said, "if it's possible, when we return to the Lingxiang Peak, I will earnestly ask the hierarch to bestow you a weapon. Anyway, there are many weapons in the weapon refining hall." "That's right. How could I forget?" Zhang Xiaohua patted her head. Her gloomy face turned bright. "Ren Xiaoxia, Chu Zhigao was thrown out from the distant cave again. A child was also cheerfully following behind him. "Jing, come here. This is the person who saved you yesterday. Ren Xiaoxia." Chu Zhigao first pointed at Ming. Then, he remembered that Ming did not introduce herself yesterday. He could only point at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Thank you, Hero Run, for saving my life." Jing was extremely obedient. He fell to the ground and kowtowed. Zhang Xiaohua quickly pulled him back and said with a smile, "Yesterday, I really did not save you. The one who saved you was my senior. You can call her Zixia Heroine." "Yes, thank you, Zixia Heroine, for saving my life." Jing kowtowed in front of Ming again. Quickly get up." Ming was happy to see that Jing was sensible. She pulled him up and thought for a moment. Then, she took out a jade bottle and handed it to him. "This is the Yuhuandan pill for my incense sect. It is most effective for healing injuries. I heard that when you meet a child, you have to give a greeting gift. I don't have anything here, so take this as a greeting gift." Chu Zhigao was slightly surprised when he heard this. Who in the Jianghu didn't know the name of the Yuhuandan pill? It was a godly item for healing injuries. He had only heard of it, but had never seen it before. At this moment, Jing turned his head and looked at Chu Zhigao. He was probably asking for something. Chu Zhigao wanted to shake his head, but Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Accept it. This is a token of appreciation from Zixia Heroine. It's rare for someone to call her a heroine for the first time. She is very happy. Don't disappoint her." Chu Zhigao nodded slightly when he heard this. Jing took the Yuhuandan pill and skipped back to Chu Zhigao's side. He passed the jade bottle to Chu Zhigao. "Thank you, Zixia heroine, for your generous gift." Chu Zhigao cupped his hands and thanked her. Then, he carefully kept the Yuandan pill. Then, he asked carefully, "Ren Xiaoxia, my mother, has rested for a night? What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. She patted her forehead and said, "Brother Chu, I will unseal your mother's acupoints now." The four of them walked to the front of the cave. Zhang Xiaohua turned around and said, "Ming, you go to the cave next door first. It won't be too late for you to come out after I ask Brother Chu." Ming didn't say anything. She nodded slightly and entered the cave where she rested last night. Jing's grandmother was still lying on the straw and sleeping soundly. When Zhang Xiaohua unsealed her acupoints, she first opened her eyes quietly. When she saw that she was in an unfamiliar place, she immediately panicked. However, when she saw her son and grandson, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. She asked, "Jing, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Grandma. Thanks to Hero Ren, I'm fine." Hero Ren? Jing's grandmother only saw Zhang Xiaohua now. She thought about what happened yesterday and struggled to get up. However, she was stopped by Zhang Xiaohua and said, "You don't have to thank me. I just happened to come at the right time. I saw injustice on the road, so of course, I had to help. Moreover, I met Brother Chu before and received some benefits from Brother Chu. Yesterday was my repayment." Jing's grandmother looked at Chu Zhigao. Chu Zhigao smiled and said, "Mother, didn't the boy tell you about Lu Town before? This Ren Xiaoxia is the one who saved the boy." Ah, Jing's grandmother was even more delighted. "Then I have to thank him even more." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, "Don't be anxious. Last night, I have already told Brother Chu some things. Let him tell you slowly in the future. In the future, we will be together for a long time. It's really troublesome to thank him. If you want to thank me, you'd better listen to what I have to say first." Jing's grandmother looked at Chu Zhigao. When she saw Chu Zhigao nodding, she smiled and said, "Since Xiaoxia said so, I won't insist anymore. Xiaoxia, what do you want to say? I'm all ears." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and told her about her dream. "In the end," she said, "I know that perhaps Ming's mother killed Brother Chu's father. But this has nothing to do with Ming." Jing's grandmother waved her hand and said, "Xiaoxia, you are overthinking. Yesterday, when I saw Miss Zixia, I saw that she looked exactly the same as the sacred ambassador from 40 years ago. I was scared. Coupled with the incident at home yesterday, I was agitated. That's why I hope Ren Xiaoxia can forgive me for my rudeness." She then said apologetically, "Although I don't know the relationship between Miss Zixia and the sacred ambassador, but Jiqiang's father wasn't killed by the sacred ambassador." Ah, Zhang Xiaohua was surprised at first, but then she was pleasantly surprised. She said, "Grandma, you are right. How could I be wrong? My husband was a lay disciple of the Dalan Temple, but he wasn't welcomed in the Dalan Temple and never received any true teachings. Later, he met the sacred ambassador of the Dragon God sect and knew that he had some skills in alchemy, so he wanted to recruit him into the Dragon God sect. Who knew that the news was leaked and the Dalan Temple's law enforcement disciples were dispatched. They caught and killed many people. My husband had just met the sacred ambassador and didn't express his opinion. He was beaten dozens of times by the Dalan Temple, crippled of his martial arts, and expelled from the Dalan Temple. Later, he became depressed and died of a serious illness. It had nothing to do with the sacred ambassador." "Ah, that's good." Zhang Xiaohua let out a long sigh and said, "Then I am relieved. Otherwise, even if Brother Chu didn't say it out loud, he would feel a little uncomfortable in his heart." Then, "Grandma, can you tell me about your meeting with the sacred ambassador?" Zhang Xiaohua asked, "Did my senior look exactly the same as the sacred ambassador?" Grandma Jing thought for a moment and nodded. "If my memory is correct, Miss Zixia does look exactly the same as the sacred ambassador. Of course, it has been 40 years and I can't guarantee that my memory is accurate, but the two of them look very similar, that's for sure." -4. Chapter 10:10. Back then, I left Dragon Mountain and followed my husband to live in Poyang Town. My husband was considered a martial arts family, but there were very few people. In his generation, he was only a little stronger than me. He was the only one left. When he was young, he had just finished laying the foundation for his family's martial arts. The old man died of illness, so he didn't have time to teach him the rest of the martial arts. When I married into the family, his martial arts were still sloppy and ordinary. Later, in Poyang town, he met a lay disciple of the Dalan temple. That disciple introduced him to the Dalan temple. Unfortunately, the lay disciples of the Dalan temple weren't the main focus of the Dalan temple's cultivation. They were only used as a way to consolidate the power of the secular world. My husband didn't receive any guidance from a brilliant master in the Dalan temple. He could only follow a group of lay disciples of the Dalan temple and work hard to expand the power of the Dalan temple. When my husband slowly understood and regretted, he met the sacred ambassador of the Dragon God sect. The sacred ambassador showed him a mysterious martial arts skill and said that as long as my husband could learn the Dragon God sect's alchemy skills and refine the elixirs they requested, he would be allowed to practice the internal strength cultivation method of the Dragon God sect. My husband was naturally moved and wanted to agree on the spot. However, the sacred ambassador said that there were some other people who wanted to go with her. She asked my husband to think about it for one more day. When night fell, she would bring those people back and they would return to the Dragon God sect together. Unexpectedly, when night fell, the sacred ambassador didn't come. Instead, the law enforcement disciples of the Dalan temple arrived first. When they saw my husband, they captured him without any explanation. Just as they were about to take him away, the sacred ambassador appeared again and asked my husband if he was willing to join the Dragon God sect. If he agreed, she would immediately rescue him. Unfortunately, before my husband could answer, an old monk from the Dalan temple appeared and fought with the divine envoy. That magical martial arts made me feel, how should I put it? It was like watching a circus show when I was young. It was incredible. However, at the end of the battle, when there was no clear winner, the sacred ambassador suddenly clutched his abdomen and pointed at the monk, cursing how despicable the monk of the Dalan temple was. After that, he fled with a pale face. The monk of the Dalan temple chased after him. My husband was naturally brought back to the Dalan temple by the law enforcement disciples of the Dalan temple. About 10 days later, my husband was released. His kung fu was crippled, and he looked dull. Later, I had Zhigao. My husband only taught him kung fu for a few years and then passed away. I felt that I couldn't live in Poyang anymore, so I took Zhigao back to Dragon Mountain. Alas, although Zhigao was talented, he didn't practice kung fu properly since he was young. Therefore, although he had inherited kung fu from his family, he could only run around Jianghu and make a living by selling his skills. Fortunately, the elixirs from Dragon Mountain are real and the medicinal plasters are effective. That's why we can barely make ends meet. Alas, it was this elixir that brought us a lot of trouble. The most dangerous 2 times were if Xiaoxia didn't save Zhigao. I'm afraid Zhigao would have died. After hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua knew what to do. She smiled and said, "This is fate between me and Brother Chu." Then, he thought for a moment and asked, "May I ask, Elder, how far is Poyang town from here? Does Xiaoxia want to go to Poyang to have a look?" Grandma Jing asked. "That's right. What you see doesn't mean that my senior sister has anything to do with the Tenryu sect's sacred ambassador. Therefore, Poyang, we want to go there and have a look. Maybe we can find something." Haha, if Xiaoxia thinks like this, why don't you go to the Dragon God sect directly? If Miss Zixia has something to do with the Tenryu sect, won't you know once you go there? Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly. We are disciples of the fragrant religion. We still have work to do. How can we go to the Tenryu sect? We should wait until later. Haha, maybe when the heavenly king of the Tenryu sect comes to our fragrant religion, we can ask him. In this case, it doesn't matter whether we go to Poyang or not. However, when Chu Zhigao told her the location of Poyang, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Poyang is on our way back to the fragrant religion. It won't be too far away. Let's go and have a look." Poyang is the territory of the Dalan temple. There are often disciples of the Righteous Alliance there. If Miss Zixia wants to find someone from the Dragon God sect, I'm afraid you have to be careful, Chu Zhigao advised. Well, we are the emissaries of the fragrant religion. We also have the permission of the law enforcement hall elder. There shouldn't be a big problem. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and then asked, Grandma, I heard from Brother Chu yesterday that your family's ancestor has been guarding something in the Dragon Mountain. What's going on? Jing's grandmother frowned and stared at Chu Zhigao. She smiled and said, It's nothing. It's just a little promise from the ancestor. There's no need to go into details. Mother, Chu Zhigao said, Ren Xiaoxia has already been to that place. Moreover, he went in. Didn't you say that the place was left by the ancestors for those who were fated to go there? Ren Xiaoxia is kind-hearted and warm-hearted. He should go to that place to have a look. Don't you think so? Ren Xiaoxia has already gone in? Jing's mother was shocked and said, That place, in the Dragon Mountain, for thousands of years, no one has ever been able to go in. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and nodded. I did go in, but I don't have any proof. There are so many things inside. I reckon that you haven't seen any of them. How can you identify them? Xiaoxia, is there a portrait in there? Jing's grandmother asked seriously. Yes, but it's too old to be seen clearly. Oh, then can the handwriting be seen clearly? Does Xiaoxia know whose portrait it is? Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, I can't identify the handwriting. According to what I know, this portrait should be of Fiery Dragon Zhenren. Fiery Dragon Zhenren? Jing's grandmother was in disbelief. She opened her mouth wide and shouted, Did you just say Fiery Dragon Zhenren? Yes, it's Fiery Dragon Zhenren. What's wrong with that? Zhang Xiaohua asked, puzzled. Son, you don't have to guard the Dragon Mountain like me anymore. When Jing Er's grandmother heard Zhang Xiaohua say the words Fire Dragon Spiritual Master, her face was already covered in tears. She couldn't help but cry. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand. After waiting for a while, Jing's grandmother stopped crying. She wiped her tears and said, I've made a fool of myself in front of Ren Xiaoxia. I don't dare to. Please enlighten me. Sigh, come to think of it, this was something that happened thousands of years ago. It was said that there used to be an immortal living on Dragon Mountain. One year, a young man with the surname Li eloped here with his beloved. Both of them were sickly and on the verge of death. They were saved by the old immortal. However, both of them had poor aptitudes and were only accepted as unofficial disciples by the old immortal. He taught them some basic immortal techniques. After that, the old immortal went on a journey and instructed the young couple to guard this place well. If there was a fated person who could enter his cave and see the portrait and say the name of the portrait, Fiery Dragon Zhenren, that person would inherit his legacy. They and their descendants would no longer have to guard this place. Of course, the young couple and their descendants could enter and try. After the young couple agreed, the old immortal left behind some superficial things and swaggered off. His whereabouts were never seen again. The young couple stayed behind to keep their promise and guard this cave residence. However, the world has undergone great changes. Not every generation of the Horned Dragon Mountain is a man who can inherit the family name. Over time, when it came to my generation, the family name was changed to Wan. If there are no accidents, the next generation of the Horned Dragon Mountain will change to Chu. Thank you for your hard work, Old Immortal. I would like to express my gratitude to you and your family on behalf of Fiery Dragon Zhenren. Zhang Xiaohua was very touched and bowed deeply. I wouldn't dare. Since you've promised Fire Dragon Immortal and have been rescued by him, of course, you'll have to guard the cave abode for him. After that, Jing's grandmother looked at Chu Zhigao and said, However, I have a presumptuous request. I hope Xiaoxia can fulfill it. Chu Zhigao smiled and said, Mother, if you want to help the boy, you don't have to. Ren Xiaoxia is a righteous man. He had already told the boy last night. You know the boy's talent. It's already very good for him to make a living in Jianghu. How would he dare to be like Ren Xiaoxia? Ren Xiaoxia has already promised that when the time is right, he will accept Jing as his disciple. Boy, and mother can also settle down in his sect. Really? Jing's grandmother was very surprised and said, We will join the incense sect? Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and waved her hand. You've misunderstood. It's not the incense sect. Oh. Jing's grandmother immediately realized and said, Of course, Xiaoxia has received Old Immortal's orthodoxy. Naturally, he will use Old Immortal's sect. I just don't know which sect Old Immortal belongs to. My ancestor has never said anything about it. Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and said, This Old Immortal also doesn't belong to any sect. I have already boldly named it Beidou School. I don't know if it's appropriate or not. When Jing's grandmother heard this, she clapped her hands and said with a smile, Old Immortal is indeed a fated person. It is recorded in ancient books that there are 7 stars in the Big Dipper. The first Tianshu Palace is the Life Star Lord. The second Merak Palace is the Silu Star Lord. The third Tianji Palace is the Lutsuan Star Lord. The fourth Tianquan Palace is the Longevity Star Lord. The fifth Yuhing Palace is the Calculator Star Lord. The sixth Kaiyang Palace is the Crossing Disaster Star Lord. The seventh Alcade Palace is the Benevolent Star Lord. The 7 Stars Lord is in charge of the survival of the world. They are in charge of the survival of the world. Xiaoxia's Beidou School is the leader of the Jianghu. It will definitely be able to suppress the Incense sect and Tenryu sect. It will become a famous sect in history. Zhang Xiaohua was sweating profusely and said embarrassedly, Old Immortal is flattering me. It's just that I am speaking without thinking. Don't take it seriously. Don't take it seriously. Jing's grandmother laughed and asked again, Then Xiaoxia's Beidou School, is it going to be set up in Dragon Mountain? Old Immortal's cave is here. No, no. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hands. I'm still young. I can't take on such an important task. Let's talk about it in the future. Besides, Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, There's nothing in Fiery Dragon Jinren's cave. It's not convenient to go in and out. Even if I have the chance to set up a sect in the future, I don't think it will be here. Jing's grandmother's face revealed a look of disappointment. -4. Chapter 10:11. Jing's grandmother's disappointment disappeared in a flash. She smiled and said, Big Dipper, I really hope to see the rise of the Beidou School. I want to see if my Jing can become the backbone of the Beidou School. As she spoke, she lovingly looked at Jing, who was nestled next to her as if he was listening to a story. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Yes, yes. Don't worry, Elder. When I finish the Beidou School, I will teach Jing the cultivation method. Jing's grandmother was waiting for him to say this. She pushed Jing and said, Jing, why aren't you coming to greet your master? Jing was stunned. He immediately prostrated himself on the ground and prepared to kowtow. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked and quickly jumped away. With a wave of her hand, Jing was unable to continue kowtowing. He hurriedly said, Elder, don't be like this. How old is this kid? How can you accept a disciple? This kid hasn't even finished practicing his martial arts. Jing's grandmother wasn't willing to listen. When she saw that Jing wasn't kowtowing, she thought that Jing didn't understand etiquette. She immediately used her hand to press down on his little head and kowtowed to the ground. However, it was as if there was a stone wall in front of Jing. No matter how hard Grandma Jing tried, she couldn't move Jing's head at all. Seeing that Jing's grandmother was obviously trying to cook the rice, Zhang Xiaohua was a little unhappy. However, looking at Grandma Jing's attitude towards Jing, it seemed to be the same as how her grandmother treated her in the past. As long as there was something that could benefit her, her grandmother would do it even if it meant losing her face. For a moment, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't bring herself to be angry. She could only wave her hand and said, Elder, don't make things difficult for this kid. Since this kid has promised to let Jing practice martial arts, he will definitely keep his promise. If you continue to force him, it won't be good. Grandma Jing knew that she couldn't do it. Her face was slightly red, and she said awkwardly, Xiaoxia, I. Zhang Xiaohua chuckled softly. Elder, there's no need for you to say anything. It's not shameful to do something that goes against one's conscience for one's descendants, and I can understand that. I'm already grateful that you were able to clarify the matter regarding my senior. At this moment, Dream, who was outside the cave, asked softly, Xiao Yao, how is it going? It turned out that Zhang Xiaohua had been asking for a long time. Meng had been waiting impatiently in the cave for a long time. After hesitating for a while, she finally walked over and asked anxiously, Hee, senior sister, You came at the right time. The old man has already told us about the matter. It's different from what we thought yesterday. The old man also gave us some clues. Let's go to Poyang Town to take a look. When Grandma Jing saw Ming, she didn't panic like she did yesterday, but she still hurriedly got up to greet her. This woman might be the daughter of the sacred ambassador of the Dragon God sect. Now, her status was much nobler than that of a disciple of the fragrance cult. How could she dare to disrespect her? When Zhang Xiaohua repeated the matter again, Ming's face was a little red. She said, "Thank you for telling us about the situation. I can't repay you. If you have any problems in the future, please send a message to the fragrance cult. I'll do my best to help." Grandma Jing repeatedly said that she didn't dare. Then, Zhang Xiaohua said to Chu Zhigao, "Now, time is tight. I still want to go to Poyang Town with my senior. No matter whether we can find anything or not, we have to hurry back to the fragrance cult. We can't stay here any longer. If there's any progress in my Beidou school, I'll come to Brother Chu." Chu Zhigao cupped his hands and said, "When Ren Xiaoxia summons Chu Zhigao will definitely come." Go up and shout? Zhang Xiaohua was sweating profusely. What the hell was this? Then, Zhang Xiaohua and Ming said goodbye to Chu Zhigao's family of 3. They hurriedly went down the mountain, according to Chu Zhigao's instructions. Poyang Town wasn't too far from the Dragon Mountain, so they arrived in a few days. On the way, Ming's gloominess gradually disappeared. She also talked and laughed. Although she wasn't very sure about her identity, 2 women who looked exactly the same in the world, with a difference of more than 20 years, were not mother and daughter. If they weren't mother and daughter, who would believe it? Therefore, Meng was almost certain that the sacred ambassador of the Tenryu sect was her mother. Now, what she needed to do was to go to the Tenryu sect to find her mother. As for going to Poyang Town today, Meng and Zhang Xiaohua had the same feeling. It didn't matter. Since it was on the way, they should go and see if there were any clues. However, when they got closer to Poyang Town, Zhang Xiaohua's expression became more and more strange. When Zhang Xiaohua reached the town entrance, she became really excited. She patted her deer and went straight into the town. She didn't ask passers-by for directions like before. Meng was happy and didn't ask her. She thought that Zhang Xiaohua was trying to confuse the mysterious person who might be following them, so she patted her horse and followed. However, Zhang Xiaohua's performance surprised her. She saw Zhang Xiaohua riding her deer as if it was her own home. She turned left and right and went through a few alleys very familiarly. Finally, she stopped in front of a big restaurant. Meng looked at the plaque of the restaurant that wrote, "Food is God," and said with a smile, "Xiaohua, I was wondering why you were running so fast. So your nose has already smelled the fragrance of food?" Zhang Xiaohua laughed and was very carefree. She jumped down from her deer and said, "I won't talk to you now. Come. Try this restaurant's spicy chicken giblets." Spicy chicken giblets? Ming was surprised. Have you been to this restaurant before? At this time, in front of the restaurant, there was still an endless stream of people and carriages. It seemed that the business was more prosperous than before. Zhang Xiaohua led her deer to the door. There was a waiter standing in front of the door. He was not old and was sweating profusely. However, he was methodically greeting every customer who came in. When the waiter saw Zhang Xiaohua, his eyes immediately lit up and said with a smile, "Dear customer, did you come from afar? Please take a seat." Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. You can tell?" "Of course." The waiter smiled charmingly and said, "This humble one has worked in this restaurant for 3 years and is familiar with everyone in town. Your face is unfamiliar, and you're riding a horse with a weapon on it. Needless to say, you must be a martial arts hero from the Jianghu. You must have some important business in town. If this humble one can't recognize you, how can I still be a waiter in this restaurant?" While they were talking, a person walked out of the restaurant and scolded, "Ma Xiaoxi, the customer came from afar and is hungry. Why aren't you inviting the customer in? What are you nagging about?" Zhang Xiaohua was even more delighted when she saw this person. Wasn't this the waiter who greeted her when she came to Food is God 5 years ago? She thought that she would not be able to meet him this time, but she actually met him again. "Shopkeeper, this little one will invite the customer in now," Ma Xiaoxi said with a smile. "Shopkeeper? Zhang Xiaohua was startled. She then cupped her hands and said, "This, shopkeeper, this little one came from afar and I have some questions. I wonder if shopkeeper has some free time?" The shopkeeper frowned. However, when he saw Zhang Xiaohua's strange horse and the weapon on it, as well as Ming's clothes behind her, he smiled and said, "This little one has to personally welcome a guest from afar." As he spoke, he called for the waiter to bring Zhang Xiaohua's David's white horse to the side. He personally led Zhang Xiaohua to the private room on the second floor. When Zhang Xiaohua entered the main hall, she looked around with joy on her face. Then, she found a table and sat down. Not only was the shopkeeper frowning, but Ming was also puzzled. She walked to his side and asked, "Why don't you go to the second floor?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at her and then at the shopkeeper. She said meaningfully, "This place is good. Isn't it lively?" When he saw Zhang Xiaohua looking at him, the shopkeeper was also puzzled. He could only smile apologetically and said, "Yes, yes, this guest is right. This main hall is indeed lively." Following which, a waiter came over with a teapot and poured tea for Zhang Xiaohua and Ming. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and asked, "Does this tea cost money?" "Yes." The waiter was startled and said, 6 copper coins for a pot. This is the rule of our food for the Heavens restaurant. It is also approved by the government. Hee, all right. Zhang Xiaohua nodded her head. After the waiter poured the tea, the shopkeeper took the menu and said, "Guest, please take a look at the menu. What would you like to order? If there isn't anything delicious on the menu, I can give you a few of our restaurant's secret dishes. These dishes aren't written on the menu. This little one saw that you are a guest from afar, so I prepared them for you." "All right, shopkeeper, please tell me." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said. Sure enough, the shopkeeper only listed a few dishes. He was still eloquent and extremely pleasant to listen to. Even Ming was attracted to him. "All right." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and waved her hand. She said, "I won't order anything else. Give me a portion of the dishes that you listed. It doesn't have to be too much. Just a small portion will do." "Yes, guest." When the shopkeeper heard, he smiled and said, "Please wait a moment. This little one will get the chef to prepare it." When the shopkeeper was about to turn around, Zhang Xiaohua called out again and said, "Give me another plate of spicy chicken giblets." "Spicy chicken giblets?" The shopkeeper was stunned and said, "Guest, please wait a moment. It will be served immediately." "Oh right. How much is this spicy chicken giblets?" "Guest, you should know that spicy chicken giblets are 55 copper coins a plate." 55 copper coins? Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "Why is it so expensive? I remember that it used to be 45 copper coins. Moreover, the tea is also 5 copper coins a pot." "Sir, are you an old customer of my food for heaven?" The shopkeeper understood immediately. He smiled and said, "I was wondering why you looked so familiar." The current Zhang Xiaohua was no longer the Zhang Xiaohua of the past. She naturally knew that the shopkeeper was just being polite. She waved her hand and said, "Yes, when I came here that year, you were just a waiter. Now, you are already the shopkeeper. Io, you are indeed an old customer. Don't say any more. Guest, please wait a moment. This little one will pass the dishes to the chef first. I will immediately come over and chat with you. The dishes on your table, today, will definitely have a 50% discount." The shopkeeper said and left. Not long later, he came back with a wine pot and sat beside Zhang Xiaohua with a smile. "Please vote for me. Please vote for me. Please keep it. Please tip me. Thank you." -4. Chapter 10:12. After the shopkeeper left, Ming asked, "Xiaohua, when did you come to this restaurant?" 5 years ago? Zhang Xiaohua said meaningfully. "Back then, I spent 50 copper coins to have a meal here." "Ha ha ha, 50 copper coins?" Meng gradually understood the meaning of 50 copper coins after leaving the chanting incense cult. She couldn't help but chuckle. But before she could finish laughing, she suddenly woke up and grabbed Zhang Xiaohua's arm. "Xiaohua, you said 5 years ago? Wasn't that when I met you?" "Yes, that's right." Zhang Xiaohua nodded solemnly. "It was 5 years ago when I met you in Shirtai Shirtai outside Poyang Town. God bless me. God bless me. Meng's eyes were almost filled with tears when she heard that. She clasped her hands together and thanked God sincerely. Meng's memories started when she met Shirtai. If they could find the place where she met Shirtai, they would most likely be able to find her origins. However, Meng followed Shirtai back to the chanting incense cult and never came out again. Shirtai also didn't tell her where she met Meng. Later, Shirtai was killed and Meng didn't know where she met Meng. The great master Changgung of the Dalan Temple wrote Poyang Town's name on the list. But before they could find Poyang Town, they gave up. If they didn't meet Chu Zhigao at Dragon Mountain, they probably wouldn't have come here to take a look. Then, why don't we hurry over and find that fairy and thatched cottage? Meng was a little anxious. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, since we're already here, and there's no Chu Sanfeng here, I presume that the mysterious person behind us doesn't know where to start. Moreover, the most important thing is that when you left with Shirtai that day, I came out alone. I don't even remember the path I took. If I don't investigate clearly, how am I supposed to find it? Yes, I understand. Dream nodded. As he spoke, the shopkeeper came over with a jug of wine in his hand. He sat down beside Zhang Xiaohua and said with a smile, have you been here before? Forgive my poor eyesight, but I didn't think of it. Hee, food comes first. How many people come in and out of the restaurant every day? If the innkeeper remembered, then food comes first would have already. What you said makes sense. Sigh. Back then, when the innkeeper saw that an outsider actually remembered him in the past, he felt rather emotional. As he drank, he bragged about his past. Actually, it was quite simple. The innkeeper was just quick and nimble in handling matters. He was recognized by the old innkeeper, and the old innkeeper betrothed his only daughter to him. While the innkeeper was bragging, the waiter served a few secret dishes and the spicy chicken offal. Looking at the spicy chicken offal that had existed in her memory for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua felt extremely emotional even before she tasted it. That was then, and this was now. In just 5 years, the vicissitudes of life had changed so much. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly asked curiously, innkeeper, your chicken offal is obviously much lesser than before. Why is it more expensive? As a person, it's better to be more honest. Who knew that the innkeeper didn't blush at all? He shook his head and said, you don't know. This food comes first was left behind by the old innkeeper. How would I dare to smash the signboard? It's just that in these few years, the price of meat has skyrocketed. Not to mention other things. The pork that ordinary people eat has increased exponentially. The price of pork has increased? What does it have to do with chicken offal? Dear customer, if the price of pork has increased, won't the people who eat meat have to spend more money? Where will the money come from? It's nothing more than the price of rice and the price of things to buy. If these things increase, won't the price of the people who buy these things increase as well? Then, not to mention other things, won't the price of the ingredients, feed, and waiter in the other shop increase as well? Since the price of feed will increase, won't the price of the chicken offal in the other shop increase as well? If that's the case, won't the spicy chicken offal in front of you increase in price as well? Zhang Xiaohua was flabbergasted and speechless. He'd been wholeheartedly focused on cultivating the immortal Tao and had never imagined that the affairs of the world would be so complicated. How could a small restaurant like this contain so much knowledge? How could it reveal so many things in the world? Karma. Unknowingly, the hand of karma in the heavenly Tao galaxy became a little clearer. Dear customer. When he heard the manager's call, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have awakened from a dream. He was jolted awake from his immersion in the comprehension of karma. Come, guest. Try my spicy chicken giblets. Does it still taste the same? Although the chef has changed, the taste should still be the same. Under the shopkeeper's hospitality, Zhang Xiaohua, who hadn't eaten meat for a long time, also ate 2 mouthfuls. As for the taste, please, it was all spicy. Back then, Zhang Xiaohua had drunk a few pots of tea. How could she taste it now? As for the other secret dishes, she only tasted them briefly. It was the same for Ming. After eating a little, she put down her chopsticks. She still wanted to hurry and find out about her origins. Dear customer, Is it not delicious? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua and Ming put down their food after a few mouthfuls, the shopkeeper was very surprised. Haha, it's nothing. It tastes the same as before. It's just that I'm not hungry or thirsty. I only came in because I saw an old friend. Oh, by the way, shopkeeper, is there a mountain god temple around Poyang Town? Mountain god temple? The shopkeeper was stunned and said casually, no, there isn't. I've lived here for more than 20 years. I've never heard of any mountain god temple. How is that possible? Zhang Xiaohua said curiously, I've been there before. It's on a mountain outside the town. Oh, I see. The shopkeeper patted his forehead and said, dear customer, you're talking about the small temple on Python Mountain, which is more than 10 miles west of the town. That small temple has been abandoned for a long time. As for whether it's a mountain god temple or not, I don't know. If you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have thought of this small temple. It's west of the town. Haha, that's great. As he spoke, Zhang Xiaohua reached into his bosom and took out a silver ingot. He smiled and said, the food is still the same as before. Not bad at all. The last time I came here, I only spent 50 copper coins. This time, no matter what, I cannot be stingy. When the shopkeeper saw the silver ingot, he quickly waved his hand and said, dear customer, you don't have to be like this. I already said that it's 50% off. You only need to pay 1 silver ingot. 1 silver ingot? Or 50% off? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. When she was at Huanxi Manor, her monthly allowance was only 3 coins. However, now that she thought about it, perhaps her monthly allowance at Huanxi Manor would increase as well. Zhang Xiaohua didn't say much. She threw the silver ingot on the table and stood up to leave. The shopkeeper quickly stood up to send her off. When they reached the entrance of the restaurant, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the street not far away. She turned her head and asked, oh right, I remember there's a ruffian in town called Brother Fan. I wonder if he's Brother Fan? The shopkeeper was surprised. You even remember this customer? However, that guy didn't have a good ending. 2 years ago, he blackmailed a young master. The young master's family came back to seek revenge. He was buried in the ground and skinned alive. Sigh, the heavens are fair. It's not that they don't want to take revenge, it's just that it's not time yet. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and leaped onto his horse. Together with Dream, they galloped towards Python Mountain, which was located in the west of the town. Poyang Town. Zhang Xiaohua met her Dream 5 years ago. She also met her second brother who was a bodyguard. Most importantly, she found a money pouch that could store items and a jade slip that could concoct elixirs. That day, Zhang Xiaohua vaguely suspected that Jing Xian came to Poyang Town for the jade slip and the money pouch. Now, he was even more certain that Shirtai came to Poyang Town after obtaining the immortal records of the incense cult. However, Shirtai didn't pass the test in the refining heart cave or didn't obtain the inheritance of the incense cult. Therefore, she couldn't use her divine sense to find the cave under the mysterious restriction and returned empty-handed. Poyang Town was also the beginning of her dream story. How could Zhang Xiaohua not have a deep impression of it? Zhang Xiaohua and her dream arrived at the town within the time it took to eat a meal. Of course, it was not winter and everything in the fields had changed. Zhang Xiaohua came to Poyang Town from the Mountain God Temple by following the footprints of martial arts masters. Most of the footprints were in the fields. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't recognize whether it was the mountain he had been to before or not. When they got close, Zhang Xiaohua released her divine sense. Seeing the mountain god temple on the mountain was still shabby, she said with a smile, sure enough, it's here. In my impression, it was a mountain. Now it looks just like a big mound. It's really ugly compared with lingering Fragrance Peak. Where is the mountain god temple? Dream asked. You have to go up the mountain and go around several peaks to see it. Alas, 5 years ago, you were still a child. It's really not easy for you to come down from the mountain. Dream sighed and said, by the way, I remember that master told you the way out when we left. How did you get so far away from the town? Zhang Xiaohua touched her nose and asked, when Shirtai took you away, how did you get out? Nonsense, of course. Dream was stunned when she said this. She laughed and said, I understand. Master took me there with Qinggong. How did you know Qinggong at that time? Then she said with a soft look, "It's hard for you, Xiaohua. You actually came back to the town from the ferry with your own strength." Hee hee, that's right. I, Xiaoxia, have been outstanding since I was a child. Even the teacher of our Guozhuang house didn't dare to accept me for fear that he would lead me astray. Ha ha ha. Dream laughed and her gloominess disappeared. While they were talking, they went up the Python Mountain. After a while, they arrived at the mountain god temple. Zhang Xiaohua released her divine sense and slowly found the direction according to her memory. She pointed to the place where the setting sun fell and said, "Dream, there is the place where we met for the first time." -4. Chapter 10:13. Yes, it was the first time. It was the place where they met for the first time. It was the place where Ming's love for Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohua's longing for Ming began. The two unfamiliar men and women suddenly met at that nameless ferry. That one chance meeting planted the seed that they had to rely on each other in their hearts. That seed was planted so deeply and so discreetly. It was only when they met again 5 years later that the seed gradually sprouted. And once it sprouted, it was full of vitality. The yearning they had for each other during those 5 years was turned into fertilizer, allowing their feelings to multiply without restraint. At this time, perhaps it was not the harvest season, but snuggling in Zhang Xiaohua's arms and standing on the bridge that stretched into the river, Ming tilted her head and looked at the quietly flowing river. She couldn't help but whisper, "Xiaohua, what if my hook didn't hook you that day? You won't recognize me?" Zhang Xiaohua put her hand on Ming's shoulder and looked at the sunset. The orange light scattered on the running water, and she said with certainty, "No, Xiaohua." Ming was very emotional. She hugged Zhang Xiaohua's waist and raised her little face. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and lowered her head, kissing Ming's cherry lips deeply. They tasted the sweetness in each other's hearts. The cottage by the river was still the same. It seemed that very few people came here. Although Dream hadn't been here for many years, she still cleaned up the dusty cottage with great familiarity. Under the moonlight, Zhang Xiaohua and Dream sat where they had sat 5 years ago and chatted until the full moon came. The next morning, the two held hands and went on the road again. Zhang Xiaohua walked through the woods behind the cottage with Ming. The mysterious inhibition was still there. She saw the flaw clearly with her divine sense. Zhang Xiaohua knew that there was nothing inside, so he didn't stop. He used his qinggong and went straight to the west. The two of them walked for an hour, but they didn't see any signs of human habitation. They knew that people rarely came here. Using their divine sense, they also didn't find anything. Ming's eyebrows gradually furrowed. Her eyes kept looking around, trying to find the place she remembered. Suddenly, she saw a thick tree. The silver leaves made Ming's eyes light up. She immediately cried out, "Little Blossom, I remember it. This big tree, I have an impression of it. Master must have brought me here before, or I walked past it." Zhang Xiaohua perked up when he heard that. He asked, "Then, which direction did it come from? Do you still remember?" Ming looked for a long time and pointed in a direction. She hesitated and said, "Maybe it's this direction. Okay, let's go and see." Zhang Xiaohua said happily. Zhang Xiaohua held Ming's hand and used her lightness skill to continue forward. However, the further they went, the more confused Ming became. Her face gradually turned pale. She looked like she was in pain. "Ming, what's wrong with you? Did you remember something?" Zhang Xiaohua saw this and held Ming's hand. She asked with concern, "I don't know why. The further we go, the more familiar this scene is. And the more I think about it, the more my head hurts." Ming gritted her teeth and said, "This?" Zhang Xiaohua stopped and said worriedly, Can you still walk?" "Yes, we must walk down this road today," Ming insisted. "This time, it seems that we are walking in front of others. But we can't let others ruin everything." "Well, that's fine. If you can't hold on because of the headache, let me know." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, Okay." Ming sighed and looked forward. "I don't know what secrets Mother has, or what secrets I have to hide. Someone actually erased it in advance. I think it's the Tenryu sect." Zhang Xiaohua said, "It seems that after we met the Tenryu sect's patrol team, Many things happened. They must be the ones who did it. But I'm just the daughter of the sacred ambassador. How does this affect the Tenryu sect? How would I know? Maybe we've arrived. Zhang Xiaohua was laughing bitterly. Suddenly, she paused and a smile appeared on her face. What's wrong? Mingqi asked. Did you think of something? I didn't think of anything. It's just that we've been in the mountains for so long. I think we've discovered something. That's bad. There are very few people here. Even beasts are rare. What could have happened? Why did you forget to walk this way? Haha, don't you see the stream here? If there are people living here, they must be near a water source. Let's follow the stream. Maybe we'll discover something? Xiaohua, you're amazing. You even know this? Amidst the praises of the dream, the two of them continued to walk forward for a long time. Suddenly, smoke rose from a valley in front of them. Xiaohua, quick. Look, there are people there. Really? Don't worry. Let's go and take a look first. The smoke might be from those hunters. Was there a need to say more? After turning around the valley, a small village appeared in front of them. Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to look around. There were only about 10 families. She then looked around the village. There were no fields. This village was really small and looked very poor. Every household did not have any walls. They only had mud brick houses, and many of them were simple straw huts. It was almost noon. Some simple chimneys on the roof had begun to emit some smoke. In the small village, there were a few children of 3 or 4 years old playing happily. There were no adults watching over them. Is it here? Zhang Xiaohua looked back with concern. Meng's face was pale. Her brows were tightly knitted. Her small hands were cold and began to tremble slightly. She clenched her teeth and looked at the small village with a complicated expression in her eyes. At this moment, the children who were playing seemed to have noticed the strangers standing not far away. They all showed vigilance and curiosity. Then, they all rushed away. A little girl ran into the nearest straw hut. After a while, she held the hand of an old woman and walked out. As she walked, she was still talking and pointing in the direction of Zhang Xiaohua and Ming. The old woman came out. She shaded her eyes with her hand and looked over for a long time. She did not speak. Then, she waved her hand and signaled them to go over. Zhang Xiaohua saw that Ming was still at a loss for a while and was surprised for a while. She said with concern, "Let's not think about it first. Go and ask the old woman. Maybe she knows something." Ming walked half a step forward. Then, she stopped and held Zhang Xiaohua's hand tightly. Zhang Xiaohua knew that Ming was a little timid. She patted her back and held her hand with her hand to show her encouragement. Then, Ming staggered forward. The old woman standing at the door held the little girl's hand. Her turbid eyes looked at Zhang Xiaohua and Ming, who were gradually approaching. When they got closer, the old woman blinked. There seemed to be surprise in her eyes. She raised her hand and pointed at Ming. She could not believe it and said, You, are you Ya? Yes, you must be Ya. The old woman asked and answered her own question. You child, where have you been these years? Why didn't you come back? Meng heard the old woman call her Ya. Her body suddenly stiffened. Then, as if she was struck by lightning, she trembled violently and murmured, Yes, I am Ya. Ya is me. While she was talking, a few younger middle-aged women came out from the other huts. When they saw Ming, they also exclaimed, Ya, you're still alive? Sai, where have you been? You've been gone for 4-5 years. When Granny Chiu passed away, she was still thinking about you. Yes, Granny Chiu never closed her eyes. She said that she had let down your mother by losing you. Sai, you child, you're finally back. Go to Granny Chiu's grave and kowtow to her. Let her rest in peace. Hehe, who is this young man? Yeah, you. They all talked at once. Ming's expression kept changing. Then, she held her forehead and fainted in Zhang Xiaohua's arms. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. She hurriedly held Ming in her arms. She was a little flustered. Child, don't worry. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's panic, the old woman said kindly, Ya has always been like this. She'll be fine after a while. Granny Chiu's hut hasn't been cleaned for many years. You should bring you to my house first. The other women also showed that they were used to this and came over to help. Zhang Xiaohua didn't need them. She easily carried Ming into the old woman's cottage. The cottage was not as small as it looked from the outside. It was actually divided into 3 rooms. The old woman pointed at the hut on the left and said, "This is where I live. Put you on the straw. I think she'll wake up in less than an hour." Zhang Xiaohua entered the hut. It was indeed small. There was a thick layer of straw on the ground and some animal skins on the straw. Zhang Xiaohua put Ming on the animal skins and checked her meridians with her true qi. She also checked her pulse. After confirming that there was nothing serious, she walked to the hut in the middle. The hut was not big. It was very crowded when the women came in. Zhang Xiaohua bowed and said, "Aunties, this is Granny. I'm Ren Xiaoyao. I'm Ya's junior brother." Junior brother? The granny frowned and said, "Where has you been for the past few years?" Well, Zhang Xiaohua hesitated. Ming fainted when she came to the village. She wasn't sure if she had anything to do with the village. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua didn't want to tell anyone about Ming. The granny didn't say anything. The other women laughed and said, "Young man, you was born here. She grew up here. We are very familiar with Lady Aya." Lady Aya? Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, Is she Ya's mother? -4. Chapter 10:14. The women were surprised. "Didn't you mention it to you?" But then, they showed more sympathy. "It seems that Ya's condition has worsened." Zhang Xiaohua frowned. "Annie's before Xiao. You came here, everything was normal. It's just that she lost her memory and didn't know where she came from. She didn't faint like today." Although Zhang Xiaohua had studied medicine in Rejuvenation Valley, Ming was obviously a mental problem. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't even figure out Yan's relatively simple illness, let alone Ming's strange illness. "Is that so?" The old lady nodded slightly. "From your expression, you should have recovered. I guess. It's because she forgot everything here and suddenly found it today, so she couldn't accept it?" Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, "That's what I think too. By the way, old lady, you also watched Ming. You grow up, right? How should I address you?" "Hee, young man, just call me Lady Jiu." At this time, the little girl who pulled Lady Jiu out just now came over with a big black bowl. She handed it to Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Brother, drink some water." Zhang Xiaohua looked at the little girl's cute appearance and took the big bowl. He smiled and said, "Little girl, how old are you? What's your name?" "Brother, my name is Nuno. I'm 5 years old this year." Nuno is so obedient. Zhang Xiaohua finished the water in the bowl in one gulp. The water was so sweet that it quenched his thirst very quickly. "Young man, tell us, where has you been these years? What has she been doing? How did you know each other? By the way, you're her junior brother. Are you from Lady Aya's sect?" "Yeah. Did you find her father?" The women seemed to have never seen an outsider before, or perhaps they were concerned about Ming Qi. They kept asking questions, which made Zhang Xiaohua not know how to answer. She looked like a village woman in the Guozhuang house. Zhang Xiaohua smiled, touched her nose and said, "Aunties, it's not that I don't want to say it, but it seems to be noon right now. Everyone's home." Before Zhang Xiaohua could finish, one of the village women came to her senses and said, "Oh, I still have sweet potatoes on the fire." As she spoke, she hurriedly ran out. The other village women also remembered that they were cooking in their own homes. They were so curious that the food on the fire was going to... Oh no! In an instant, Granny Nine's cottage was empty. A smile appeared in Granny Nine's eyes. Zhang Xiaohua looked at her and said embarrassedly, "Lady Jiu, please don't blame me. It's better for you to say these things. I'm too embarrassed to say it." "Ha." Lady Jiu grinned, revealing her few remaining teeth. "By the way, Lady Jiu, are you and Nyonya the only ones at home?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at the other room and asked. "No, there's also Nunyo's father. He went hunting with the other men in the village. He'll probably be back at night." "Yes, I understand. No wonder there's no farmland around the village. It seems like the villagers rely on hunting for a living. Yes, this land is barren. They used to plant crops, but the harvest wasn't good, so they switched to hunting. After hunting for a long time, there's no prey nearby. They can only go to the depths of the forest to look for prey. That's why they leave at dawn every day and only come back at night. Sigh, it's really hard. Zhang Xiaohua sighed. It can't be helped. The laborers in the village don't know how to do anything except hunting. However, the people in the town like the game in the mountains. They can be exchanged for a lot of things in town. It's more suitable than farming. Oh, speaking of which, I have to thank Ya's mother. Why? Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. At this moment, Xiaohua's voice suddenly came from inside the house. Xiaohua, Xiaohua, save me, save me. Zhang Xiaohua didn't hesitate and immediately rushed into the house like a ghost. Lady Jia was old and dim-sighted. She accidentally lost sight of Zhang Xiaohua, which scared her. In the house, Meng sat up and looked around. She saw Zhang Xiaohua rushing in. She opened her arms and hugged Zhang Xiaohua. She buried her head deep in his chest. Zhang Xiaohua patted her back and said gently, I'm here. Don't worry, don't worry. Meng seemed to have a nightmare. The warmth of Zhang Xiaohua's body and the voice that made her feel at ease gradually drove away her fear. After a long time, Meng raised her head and asked, Is this my home? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, This is the village you lived in, but your home is still next door? Well, Xiaohua, my mind is in a mess. You must stay with me. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I can't ask for more. Meng Ran smiled sweetly. Her eyes were a bit more stable. Accompanied by Zhang Xiaohua, Meng came to the cottage. She bowed to Lady Jiao and said, Granny, I can't remember what happened here. Can you tell me more about it? Granny Jiao looked at Meng and kindly said, Of course you can. Actually, as long as you can wake up and not be as muddle-headed and unconscious as before, even if you forget everything that happened in the past. So what? Meng nodded and said, I thought so before, but I thought that my parents might be waiting for me here. I had to come back. That's why. I came all the way here. Granny, can you tell me about my parents and my past? Alas, your mother came here for the first time, and I was the one who brought her here. Even you could be considered as me helping you give birth. Your matters, how could I not know? Ming was surprised and said, Granny, why can't I remember anything? While they were talking, footsteps were heard outside the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua looked up. It was the few village women who had just gone out. They were all holding some food in their hands. Seeing that Ming had woken up, they were all happy. Yeah, you're finally awake? Come, you must be hungry. Eat something first. The village women all handed the food to Ming. The cottage was crowded again. Lady Ju smiled and said, Let's go. It's too small here. Let's sit outside. After listening to Granny Jia's instructions, a few of the village women quickly set up a few simple boards outside the house. They also took a few animal skins and placed them on the ground to serve as a table and chairs. Everyone sat on the animal skins. Meng could not refuse the village women's courtesy and ate a few mouthfuls. The rest of the food was given to the boys who came after hearing the noise. They each took a small bowl and chewed happily. Looking at Ming's expectant eyes, Lady Jiao smiled and said, Yeah, you were like this when you were young too? Then she pointed in the direction where Zhang Xiaohua and the others came from and said, I can't remember when it happened. Maybe 30 years ago? At that time, I was still out hunting with your father. In the wee hours of the morning, I was preparing to go hunting outside the village, but after walking for a while, I realized that I didn't bring any anesthetic. I had no choice but to return to the village. When I walked to the river, I saw a woman in white with her left arm covered in blood. She was your mother. Looking at her motionless appearance, she must have fainted. When I was young, I was also a big man with some strength, so I carried her back alone. That day, I didn't go out to hunt again. I helped your mother settle down. At that time, she was bleeding a lot. Moreover, there was a blood-red handprint on her waist. I didn't dare to act rashly. I just bandaged her up and waited for her to wake up or for the child's father to come back. Fortunately, she woke up before noon. Seeing that I was by her side, she asked me about the situation vigilantly. Then, she took out a few types of medicine and told me which ones to apply externally and which ones to take orally. I followed her instructions one by one. Later, your mother fell asleep again. She did not wake up until the head of the family came back. At that time, the cottage was still small. The head of the family went out to find a place to sleep. I stayed here to take care of your mother. After a few days, your mother's injury got better. The head of the family and several men in the village discussed and asked for your mother's opinion. Then, we built a simple cottage in the east of the village for your mother to live in temporarily. At that time, although the men in the village were strong and skilled in archery, they did not practice martial arts. After your mother recovered, she taught them some simple martial arts. On the one hand, it was for self-defense. On the other hand, it was for hunting more prey. Young man, just now, you said that you wanted to thank Ya's mother. If she did not teach us martial arts, I am afraid that our life would be more difficult now. What happened after that? Meng held her cheeks and listened carefully. After that, your mother lived in this village for a year and suddenly disappeared without leaving any message. Of course, at that time, we all knew that your mother was not a simple person, so we did not dare to ask her anything. After she left, we all thought that she went back to her previous sect and would never see her again. However, 2 years later, your mother came back again. This time, she did not come alone. She came with an older woman, Granny Chio, who took care of you later. Oh, when your mother came back again, her belly was slightly bulging. It seemed that she was 4 months pregnant. After your mother and Granny Chio came back, they lived in the cottage that she used to live in. However, after Granny Chio's renovation, the cottage was much bigger. It seemed that they planned to live there for a long time. Later, I secretly asked Granny Chio. She said that your mother was tired of the life outside and would live in this village in the future. After your mother came back to the village for the second time, she never went out again. Only Granny Chio went out a few times a year to buy things from outside. -4. Chapter 10:15. After a long time, the villagers gradually became familiar with your mother and Granny Chio. Your mother asked us to call her Lady Aya. We don't know her specific name, but your mother was very generous. Every time Granny Chio went out to buy things, she would give something to each family. We were all very grateful to her, especially me, because I saved her life. I gave more things than others every time. You were born in the spring of the second year after your mother came. There weren't many outsiders in our small mountain village, and there weren't many people who had children. There was no midwife at all, so I volunteered to help you deliver. Let me think. You should be 18 years old this year. 18 years ago. It's gone in the blink of an eye. After Lady Gio finished lamenting, she continued, after giving birth to you, your mother's health had always been poor. She was often bedridden. At that time, I was very surprised. After giving birth to you, I didn't change much. Later on, my body became stronger. Your mother knew martial arts, so shouldn't she be better? Later on, I heard from your mother that because she was seriously injured last time, she couldn't be cured. After giving birth to you, her vitality was greatly damaged, and she couldn't recover. What's the old saying again? Misfortunes never come singly. Your mother's health was getting weaker and weaker, and you had problems. Since you were born, you looked fine for the first few years, but for some reason, from the age of 5, you were often muddle-headed. Sometimes, you didn't even know who you were, and you didn't know your mother. You often got lost outside the village. We all advised your mother not to live here anymore. She should move back to the town or a bigger town, and let the doctors there treat your mother and you. However, your mother refused to agree no matter what. She only said that your illness was related to her injuries in the past. It was because her vitality was greatly damaged. She said that your meridians were damaged, which caused your congenital deficiency. When you grow up, you will slowly recover. Of course, we couldn't do anything about it. We could only pay more attention to you. Anyway, this village is small, and it's easy to take care of you. But when you were 7 years old, Lady Gio, not 7 years old, but 8 years old. I just came here that year, a village woman corrected her. Oh, then you were 8 years old. You fell ill and didn't know anyone. You even used a small bow and arrow to shoot people. Your mother was also seriously ill. Finally, she couldn't hold on and passed away. Then, my mother, where is she buried? Meng asked sadly. Of course it's behind the village. Over there, It's on that mountain ridge. Granny Nine said as she pointed at a mountain ridge. When I'm done, let Nyonyo and the others accompany you. When Granny Chio was still alive, she often took you to pay respects. Alas, after your mother passed away, your illness worsened. You were like a different person. Granny Chio was told by your mother to take care of you wholeheartedly. But when you were awake, you were as obedient as a kitten. When you were confused, you would hit her. You were a child, so you didn't know. Although you weren't strong, it was still very painful. Granny Chio endured it. Alas, she took care of you until you were no different from when your mother was alive. Early in the morning, Granny Chio couldn't stand the cold and went back to put on a cotton-padded jacket. Lu Xuan was thinking of using a dustpan to catch the sparrow, so he forgot about you. When Granny Chio came back with a cotton-padded jacket, you were gone. We followed the tracks you left in the snow to the stream, but we couldn't find your footprints. At that time, Granny Chio ran down the mountain along the stream like a crazy person. We followed her everywhere, but we couldn't find any trace of you. We didn't know where you went. We went back to the village, but Granny Chio didn't come back. We searched for 4 days and 4 nights without sleeping, but we still couldn't find any trace of you. We even went to the town in the east, but we couldn't find you. After we came back, Granny Chio fell ill and couldn't recover. Within half a year, she died. Meng was already in tears. She cried and said, Lady Jiao, I didn't know about this. When I woke up, I was already with my master. And it was already 5 years ago. It was at the ferry at the foot of the mountain in the distance. I even saw my junior brother. You. Why didn't you find that place? Silly girl. We almost searched the entire mountain. Why didn't we find that ferry? That cottage was built by us before. But when we went there was no one there at all. Meng, don't think so much. Lady Ju is talking about what happened when you were 9 years old, and you were talking about what happened when you were 13. There are 4 or 5 years in between. Maybe you went somewhere else first, and then you were rescued by the Shirtai. Don't forget, Lady Ju said that you were delirious at that time. But when I met you, you were very clear-headed. In these 4 or 5 years, maybe something happened to you, and then you were taken to the ferry by the Shirtai. Meng finally stopped crying and nodded slightly. You're right. Fate makes fools of people. Things are often like this. Seeing Meng sad, the village women next to her wiped their tears. After a while, Meng stood up and said, Lady Jiao, I want to pay my respects to my mother and Granny Chio. Yes, you should go. Your mother should pay her respects, and Granny Chio should pay her respects even more. She was still talking about you when she died. Meng's eyes turned red again. Under the guidance of Nyonyo and some other children, Zhang Xiaohua and Meng came to the mountain ridge behind the village. There were more than 10 graves on the mountain ridge. In the southernmost area, there were 2 inconspicuous ones. There were 2 wooden signs in front of them. One of the words could not be seen clearly, and the other one was also blurred. However, one could still vaguely see that it was Grandma Chio. Nyonyo said in a childish voice, These 2 are Lady Aya and Granny Chio. Every year when we came to pay our respects, Grandma would always talk about them. I remember them very clearly. Hearing Nyonyo's words, Meng's tears couldn't help but fall like a broken string of pearls. Meng quickly walked to her mother's grave and knelt down. She kowtowed 9 times and murmured, Mother, I'm back. Forgive me for being unfilial. I didn't know that Mother was buried here. I couldn't come to pay my respects to Mother. Seeing the lush grass on the grave, Zhang Xiaohua sighed. She walked over and pulled up the grass one by one. Then, she asked Nyonyo to bring a shovel from the village to add new soil on the grave. Then, Meng cleaned up Granny Chio's grave. After Meng finished paying her respects, she scratched her head. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know what to do. She couldn't kneel down and kowtow, could she? So, she asked tentatively, Meng heard Zhang Xiaohua calling her with tears in her eyes. She looked at her lover standing next to her, bit her lips and said, Thank you, Xiaohua. Mother, and Granny Chio will be very happy if they know that you helped them repair their graves. Then, she looked down at the 2 inconspicuous graves and murmured, Your son wants to be filial, but you are not here. Mother, your daughter, has grown up now. My illness should be cured, but you are not here. You've left and taken away all of my memories. Even if I wanted to miss you, I couldn't. Are you worried about your daughter? Meng's shoulders shook again, and she cried softly. Zhang Xiaohua looked at her and did not know how to comfort her. After thinking for a while, she found a place to sit down. The children around her played for a while and found it boring. They all clamored to return to the village. Beside the desolate little graveyard, there was only the beautiful Meng, who was filled with endless melancholy. There was also Zhang Xiaohua, who wanted to comfort her but was powerless to do so. The afternoon passed quickly. Lady Jiao and the other village women knew how Meng felt, so they didn't disturb her. They waited for the sky to turn dark, and several people came back from the other side of the village. They had bows and arrows on their backs, crude spears and padao in their hands, and some game on their shoulders. These people came from the mountain ridge. They saw people on the graves from afar, so they quickened their steps. When they saw Meng, an older man shouted in surprise, "Yeah, you are back?" Then, he shouted behind him, "Sikong, Granny Chiozia is back?" "Ah Xiao, yeah." As he shouted, an old man jogged over from behind. "It's really ya. You are back. You don't know Granny Chio. Sigh, I complained so much. She only spoke to me when she was about to leave." Meng didn't know what to do when she saw Sikong's sincere smile and concerned tone. She looked at Zhang Xiaohua for help. She didn't have the spirit she had when she killed the bad guys on Dragon Mountain. Zhang Xiaohua quickly stepped forward and cupped her hands. "Sikong, I am Ren Xiaoyao." Meng, "Oh, Yuz Jr. Yuz lost all her memories. She doesn't recognize Sikong or the other uncles and aunties in the village." I know. Sikong nodded kindly. "You used to be like this too. I haven't seen her for a few years. She seems normal now. She will be fine in the future." "Yes, Sikong. She just doesn't remember the past. Everything else is fine." That's great. Which miracle doctor cured her? This old man needs to thank him properly." Meng wasn't used to Sikong's unusual care for her. She said embarrassedly, "Sikong, are you close to me?" When a man beside her heard this, he smiled and said, "Little Ya, Fourth Master isn't very familiar with you, but he's very familiar with Granny Chio." Sikong's weathered face was a little embarrassed. He waved his hand and said, "All right, it's good that you are back. Yeah, go back to the village. It's windy here. Don't get sick again. Otherwise, Granny Chio will blame me again." Ming's eyes reddened again. She nodded and said, "Yes, Sikong." Zhang Xiaohua and Ming returned to the small village with a few men who came back from hunting. Sikong pointed to a large wooden house in the north of the village and said, "Yeah, this is where you lived with your mother and Granny Chio. Do you remember?" -4. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.